headlights flickered twice before dying completely, stranding me in darkness on that winding mountain road outside Los Angeles. My name is Thaddeus Mitchell Dawson, 32 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. I never planned to be driving alone through Angeles National Forest at midnight, but life has a way of rearranging your carefully laid plans. I'm an environmental photographer by trade, which usually means peaceful days capturing nature's beauty, not white-knuckling my way through pitch-black California wilderness. My trusty 2011 Ford F-150 Lariat had never given me trouble before. The Silver Beast, with its 5.0 LV8 engine and extended cab, had carried me through snowstorms in Montana and desert heat in Arizona without complaint. But tonight, something felt different. The truck had been making an odd ticking sound since I'd passed through Pasadena, like something was caught in the undercarriage. I'd ignored it, focused on reaching the campsite before midnight. Bad decision. Terrible decision, actually. I'd come down to Los Angeles for my cousin's wedding, deciding to extend my stay afterward for some nature photography in the nearby mountains. The Angeles National Forest was supposed to be breathtaking this time of year, and I'd heard about a secluded camping spot that offered unparalleled sunrise views over the San Gabriel Mountains. What I hadn't counted on was the bizarre radio reports I'd been hearing all day about 3 hikers who'd gone missing in this exact area 2 weeks ago. Reaching for my phone, I cursed under my breath. No signal. Of course, I was miles from civilization, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to sway with unnatural rhythm in the night breeze. The forest felt alive, watchful. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck, the cool mountain air instantly raising goosebumps on my arms. The birds had gone silent, and that's when I noticed something disturbing. Not a single insect chirped in the darkness. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. I popped the hood and aimed my flashlight at the engine, though I had no real idea what I was looking for. Car troubles weren't my specialty, and in the eerie silence of the forest, every metallic ping of the cooling engine made me flinch. That's when I heard it, a distinct crack of a branch breaking somewhere in the trees to my left. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam only illuminated the first few feet of dense underbrush before being swallowed by darkness. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting drawing attention to myself. My voice sounded small against the vastness of the wilderness. No response came, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees suddenly appearing closer than they had been moments before. I told myself it was just my imagination working overtime, fueled by those missing hiker reports and too many horror movies. Back in the truck, I locked the doors and tried the engine again. Nothing but a sad clicking sound. I'd have to wait until morning or for another vehicle to pass by. I reclined my seat slightly, keeping my flashlight close. Sleep seemed impossible, but I must have dozed off because I awoke with a start to the sound of scratching against the passenger window. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what looked like handprints slowly sliding down the glass, leaving behind a strange, viscous substance that gleamed in the moonlight. I fumbled for my flashlight, nearly dropping it in panic, but when I finally managed to point it at the window, there was nothing there. No handprints, no substance, nothing but clear glass reflecting my own terrified face. Had I dreamed it? I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That's when my headlights suddenly flickered back to life on their own, illuminating the road ahead, and the figure standing motionless in the middle of it, facing away from me, unmoving despite the bright lights now shining directly on it. The figure in the road didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I debated my options. The engine had mysteriously come back to life, which meant I could drive, but that would mean heading straight for whatever was standing there. I reached for my phone again, desperately hoping for even a single bar of reception, but still nothing. The clock on my dashboard read 3:17 a.m. Dawn was hours away. Making a split-second decision, I shifted into reverse, intending to turn around and head back towards civilization. The F-150 lurched backward with a concerning groan from somewhere deep in its mechanical guts. Through my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement, something darting between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the tires spinning on loose gravel. When I looked back at the road ahead, the figure was gone. I slammed on the brakes, sending my camera gear sliding across the passenger seat. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I scanned the tree line. Had I imagined it all? The forest played tricks on tired minds. That's what all the hiking guides said. But those missing people, the reports had mentioned they'd called friends before disappearing, describing strange figures on the trails. I pulled over and dug out my map, spreading it across the steering wheel under the dim cabin light. If I couldn't go forward on this road, I'd need to find another route. According to the map, there was an old Forest Service road about half a mile back that eventually connected to the main highway. It would add hours to my journey, but anything was better than staying here. As I studied the map, a drop of liquid splashed onto the paper. Then another. I looked up at the roof of my truck, expecting to see a leak, but instead found myself staring at a dark red stain spreading across the upholstery. Blood. It was seeping through the roof of my truck. I scrambled out of the vehicle, heart pounding in my ears. Above me, dangling from a tree branch directly over my truck, was a deer carcass, freshly killed and gutted. But something was wrong about it. The precision of the cuts, the careful arrangement of the limbs, the fact that it had been placed exactly above where I'd stopped. This wasn't the work of natural predators. Someone wanted me to find this. I threw myself back into the truck and peeled away, no longer caring about the strange noises coming from under the hood. The Forest Service road was barely visible, overgrown and clearly unused for months, if not years. My F-150's powerful headlights cut through the darkness as I turned onto the narrow path, branches scraping against the sides of my truck like fingernails. The suspension groaned as I navigated over roots and rocks, each bump sending shockwaves of fear through my body. After 20 minutes of white-knuckle driving, I hit a clearing. Moonlight bathed the open space, revealing what appeared to be an abandoned campsite. Tents still stood, though they were torn and flapping in the night breeze. A fire pit held the cold remains of what had been a sizable blaze. 3 camping chairs sat arranged around it, as if waiting for their owners to return. With a sickening lurch in my stomach, I realized I might be looking at the camp of those missing hikers. I should have kept driving. I know that now. But curiosity, that damned photographer's instinct, got the better of me. I parked and grabbed my camera and flashlight. If these were indeed the belongings of the missing persons, the authorities would want documentation. At least, that's what I told myself as I approached the site, the beam of my flashlight sweeping over personal items scattered about, a novel splayed open, its pages damp with dew, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, hiking boots neatly placed outside a tent. Everything looked as though the campers had simply vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. And then I saw the journal, its leather cover glinting in my flashlight beam, lying open on one of the camping chairs. The journal's pages fluttered in the breeze as I approached, almost beckoning me forward. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my flashlight beam dancing across the handwritten entries. The last one was dated exactly 2 weeks ago. Day 3 at Angeles Forest. It read in hurried script. We're not alone out here. There's something watching us from the tree line. Marcus thinks I'm being paranoid, but Eliza feels it too. The rangers never mentioned any large predators in this area, but we've been hearing strange sounds at night, almost like whispering. Found unusual markings on trees this morning, not animal claw marks, more deliberate, like symbols. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, nearly dropping the journal, but saw nothing except shadows between the trees. The unnatural silence had returned. No insects, no night birds, just the soft whisper of wind through leaves. I tucked the journal into my jacket pocket and continued exploring the site, my senses on high alert. The contents of one tent had been violently scattered, sleeping bag slashed open, personal belongings strewn about. The other 2 tents seemed untouched, as if their occupants had simply stepped out for a moment. My camera clicked quietly as I documented the scene, professional habit taking over despite my mounting dread. Through my viewfinder, I noticed something I'd missed with my naked eye, a trail of dark stains leading from the destroyed tent into the woods. Blood? I followed the trail cautiously, each step carrying me further from the relative safety of my truck. The stains led to a small ravine about 50 yards from the campsite, where I discovered a backpack partially hidden under fallen leaves. As I reached for it, my flashlight caught something reflective a few feet away, a phone with a cracked screen lying face up on the ground. I picked it up, surprised to find it still had battery. The lock screen showed dozens of missed calls and text notifications. More disturbing were the unsent outgoing messages in the draft folder. "They're taking US one by one," read one. Another simply said, "Not human. The last draft, timestamped 3:42 a.m. 2 weeks ago, chilled me to the bone. If found, run." They look like people, but they're not. The backpack yielded more disturbing finds. A map with bizarre markings circling our exact location, a broken compass whose needle spun continuously instead of pointing north, and a voice recorder. With shaking hands, I pressed play. At first, there was nothing but the expected sounds of forest ambience and occasional conversation between the hikers. Then, about 40 minutes in, a woman's voice, presumably Eliza, whispered urgently, "There's someone standing just outside the firelight. They won't respond when we call out." Silence followed. Then a man's terrified scream cut through the recording before it abruptly ended. I nearly jumped out of my skin when headlights suddenly swept across the clearing. Another vehicle was approaching on the service road. Relief washed over me. Other people, help at last. I rushed back toward the campsite, waving my flashlight, ready to flag them down. The approaching vehicle slowed as it entered the clearing, and I could now make out that it was a Forest Service truck. Thank God. Rangers. They'd know what to make of all this. The truck came to a stop, and a figure stepped out, face obscured by the glare of headlights. "Hello there," a friendly voice called out. "Having some trouble tonight?" I explained my situation rapidly. The stalled truck, the strange encounters, the abandoned campsite. The ranger nodded sympathetically, stepping forward into the light. And that's when I noticed something terribly wrong. Though dressed in a perfect ranger uniform, the person's movements were stiff, mechanical, as if they weren't accustomed to their own body. Their smile never reached their eyes, which reflected my flashlight beam like a wild animal's would. "You shouldn't be here," the ranger said, still smiling that empty smile. "Nobody should be here. Not after what we found." Their head tilted at an impossible angle, neck bending in a way human anatomy shouldn't allow. "But now that you are, you'll have to stay. Just like the others." As they spoke, I noticed more figures emerging from the tree line behind them. People in hiking gear, moving with that same unnatural gait. With a surge of horror, I realized I was looking at what remained of the missing hikers. Except it wasn't really them anymore. Their expressions were blank, their eyes reflecting my flashlight with that same animal shine. And they were all moving toward me. I ran. There's no shame in admitting it. I turned and sprinted back toward my F-150, adrenaline coursing through my veins like liquid fire. Behind me, those things that looked like people but moved all wrong gave chase. They didn't shout or call out. They just followed with a terrible, silent determination that was somehow worse than any threat or war cry. My truck keys jangled in my trembling hand as I raced across the clearing, fumbling with the remote unlock. The F-150's doors clicked open just as the first of my pursuers reached the edge of the campsite. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and jabbed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, without hesitation, no sign of the earlier mechanical problems. No time to question this stroke of luck. I threw the truck into reverse, tires spraying dirt and gravel as I executed a frantic three-point turn. Through the windshield, I could see them approaching, the fake ranger leading the pack, that horrific smile still fixed on their face. One of them, a woman in a torn red hiking jacket who must have been Eliza, moved with unnatural speed, reaching my truck before I could complete my turn. Her hand slapped against the driver's side window, leaving smears of something black and viscous. Up close, I could see that her skin had a waxy quality, and what I had initially taken for dirt smudges on her face were actually patches where the skin seemed to be peeling away, revealing something dark and glistening underneath. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and the F-150 shot forward down the service road, branches whipping against the windows and roof. The truck bounced violently over the uneven terrain, my head nearly hitting the ceiling with each impact. The journal and phone I'd found tumbled from my pocket onto the passenger seat. In my rearview mirror, I could see those things pursuing me, moving between the trees with impossible agility, keeping pace despite my increasing speed. The service road seemed different now, narrower, more overgrown than when I'd driven in. Twice I nearly missed sharp turns, the truck fishtailing dangerously close to the edge of steep drops. My headlights illuminated a fallen tree blocking the path ahead. I had seconds to decide, try to go around it or plow through. Going around meant slowing down, giving those things a chance to catch up. I gripped the wheel tighter and pressed the accelerator to the floor, aiming for the thinnest part of the trunk. The impact rattled my teeth and sent pain shooting through my shoulders as the seatbelt caught me. Metal screeched against wood, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought I was stuck. Then the truck lurched forward, dragging pieces of splintered tree beneath it. A glance at the fuel gauge showed it dropping rapidly. Something had punctured the tank. I had maybe 20 minutes of driving left, if I was lucky. The main highway had to be close. It had to be. Something heavy landed on the roof of the truck with a dull thud. Fingers, too long, too thin to be human, curled around the edge of my driver's side window, trying to find purchase. I swerved violently, scraping the truck against trees in an attempt to dislodge whatever had attached itself to my vehicle. A face suddenly appeared, upside down, peering through my windshield. The fake ranger, somehow clinging to my roof. Their skin had begun to slip, revealing patches of something grayish and mottled underneath. Their mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I screamed, jerking the wheel hard to the right. The truck crashed through the underbrush, leaving the service road entirely. I was driving blind now, pure panic guiding my actions. The thing on my roof lost its grip and tumbled away, but I couldn't slow down. They were still behind me, still coming. My headlights suddenly illuminated open space ahead. I'd reached another clearing, larger than the last. And there, cutting across it like a lifeline, was the main highway. Salvation. Civilization. Just 100 yards of open ground away. I almost made it. That's the thing that haunts me most in my nightmares. How close I came to escaping. My Ford F-150 barreled across that clearing, engine screaming in protest, gas gauge hovering just above empty. The highway was right there, its asphalt surface gleaming under the moon like a black river of freedom. I could even see headlights in the distance. Other vehicles, normal people going about their lives, completely unaware of the horror unfolding in the forest beside them. The truck hit a hidden depression in the ground, and for a sickening moment, I was airborne. The landing was catastrophic, metal crumpling, glass shattering as the F-150 rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side just 30 yards from the highway. Pain exploded across my body, warm blood trickling into my eyes from a gash on my forehead. The truck's frame had buckled around me, pinning my left leg. I hung suspended in my seat belt, disoriented and fighting to stay conscious. Through the spider-webbed remains of my windshield, I could see them approaching, the knot people, emerging from the tree line and walking with that terrible, puppet-like gait across the clearing toward my wrecked vehicle. The fake ranger led them, that inhuman smile still fixed on what was left of their face. Parts of their uniform had torn away in the chase, revealing gray, mottled skin beneath that seemed to shift and ripple like something was moving underneath it. I fumbled for my phone, hands slick with blood, praying for a signal this close to the highway. One bar. It was enough. I dialed 911, watching in horror as the creatures drew nearer. When the dispatcher answered, I babbled frantically about the accident, about being trapped, about the people who weren't people coming to get me. I'm sure she thought I was delirious from my injuries. She kept telling me to calm down, that help was on the way. I wanted to believe her. Through the shattered side window, I could see headlights slowing on the highway. Someone had spotted the wreck. A good Samaritan pulling over to help. I tried to shout, to warn them away, but my voice was barely a whisper now. The knot people noticed too, several of them changing direction to intercept this new arrival. I watched in horror as a middle-aged man in a business suit approached from the highway, flashlight in hand, calling out to ask if anyone was hurt. The fake ranger met him halfway, still wearing that terrible smile. From my vantage point, I could see the exact moment the man realized something was wrong. He took a step back, flashlight beam fixed on the ranger's face, now slipping grotesquely to reveal what lurked beneath. The man turned to run, but the others had circled behind him. His scream was cut short. His flashlight fell to the ground, still illuminating the nightmarish scene as they surrounded him. I closed my eyes, unable to watch what happened next. When I opened them again, the creatures were continuing their approach to my truck, now just yards away. The journal and phone I'd found had scattered across the dashboard in the crash. I reached for them, some desperate part of me wanting to preserve this evidence, to make sure someone would know what happened here. As my fingers closed around the journal, I heard sirens in the distance. The creatures heard them too, heads swiveling in unison toward the sound. For a moment, they hesitated. That hesitation saved my life. The sirens grew louder, and lights appeared on the highway, police cruisers responding to my 911 call. The knot people retreated, moving back toward the tree line with that same unnatural speed. The fake ranger was the last to go, pausing to look directly at me through the shattered windshield. It raised a hand, no longer even attempting to appear human, fingers too long and jointed in the wrong places, and pressed it against the glass. "We'll find you," it said in a voice that sounded like several voices layered atop each other. "Wherever you go, you've seen us now. You belong to the forest." Then it was gone, vanishing into the darkness just as the first police car pulled up. I never liked camping much, but sometimes life pushes you into things you don't really want to do. My name's Jonas Mercer, middle name Red, and I'm from Flagstaff, Arizona, big enough to not be a small town, small enough to still feel like one. I'm 32, work construction, and drive a 2012 Chevrolet Silverado 1500 extended cab, black, with a busted passenger mirror I never got around to fixing. Not exactly a road trip kind of guy, but here I was, taking one anyway. It started with a text from Graham, an old high school buddy I hadn't seen in years. "Weekend in the woods? Got a cabin. Let's catch up." I almost ignored it, but the dude had a way of making you feel like a jackass if you said no. He was the kind of guy who talked you into things, usually dumb things, but things nonetheless. He lived out in LA now, had some money, and apparently he'd scored a hidden gem of a cabin deep in some forest outside the city. The drive from Flagstaff to LA was long and boring, miles of empty desert, the occasional diner, and stretches where the only company was old billboards peeling under the sun. I made good time, only stopping for gas and a greasy burger at some off-ramp dive near Barstow. Got into LA late, met up with Graham and his girlfriend, Tasha, a city girl through and through. Slick black hair, expensive nails, and that air of someone who thought camping was a joke. Then there was Ben, Graham's other buddy, some tech guy who barely looked up from his phone. We left the next morning, driving out in two cars, Graham's RAV4 leading, me trailing in the Silverado. The deeper we got into the woods, the less cell service we had, and the GPS stopped working altogether. Roads turned to dirt, trees got denser, and the so-called hidden gem looked more and more like something out of a horror movie. The air got thick, the kind that made you feel like you shouldn't be there. When we pulled up, I knew something was off. The cabin was old, too old. Not the cute, rustic kind, but the kind that felt like it had history, bad history. It had a stone chimney, a sagging porch, and windows that looked too dark, even in daylight. There was no electricity, just an old generator Graham swore worked fine. It looked like a place where people went missing. I didn't say anything, but I sure as hell thought about turning back. The problem was, by the time I thought about leaving, it was already too late. The first few hours at the cabin were fine. Too fine, like the quiet before a storm. Graham was hyped up about the place, showing off like he owned it. "Dude, this place was a steal," he kept saying, cracking open beers and grinning like we weren't standing in front of a house that looked like it held 100 bad secrets. Inside, it was worse. Cold, even though it wasn't cold outside. The air smelled like damp wood and something sour, like meat left out too long. There were weird little things, like the furniture was slightly off-kilter, as if the floor wasn't level, or how some doors didn't close all the way, no matter how hard you tried. I noticed it, but no one else seemed to care. Then there was the basement door. I found it while dumping my bag in one of the rooms. Just a simple wooden door at the end of the hall, but the lock on it wasn't normal. Heavy-duty padlock. New. Someone had gone out of their way to keep whatever was down there from coming up. "You see this?" I called out. Graham came over, shrugged. "Yeah, the guy who rented it to me said not to go down there. Said it's unstable or something. That didn't sit right. Why padlock it? Why not just board it up?" But Graham was already walking away, cracking another beer. Ben barely looked up from his phone, and Tasha was outside, trying to get a signal. Nobody cared about the basement, but me. Then night came. The generator struggled to keep the lights on, flickering just enough to make everything feel worse. Tasha kept complaining about a smell, but I didn't smell anything different from before. It's like something rotting, but it comes and goes, she said, frowning. Then Ben started acting weird. He kept rubbing his arms, saying he felt like something was crawling on him. At first, we laughed, called him paranoid, but then Graham's face changed. Dude, your neck. I leaned in closer and saw it. Red scratches, fresh ones, running up the side of Ben's neck like something had scraped him. Not deep, but too even to be from him, just itching. Tasha laughed nervously. Maybe you scratched yourself. I didn't. Ben's voice was flat. I didn't feel it. That was the first time I got that deep, sinking feeling in my gut. Something was wrong. Then the cabin door swung open. Just like that. No wind, no reason, just wide open, the night stretching past it like a mouth. We all stared at it. The fire popped in the hearth. The generator hummed. Nothing outside but darkness. It's the wind, Graham said, but it wasn't. There was no wind. I stood up, walked over, and shut the door. Locked it. I didn't say anything, but I knew. This trip had already gone bad. That night, I barely slept. The cabin creaked, the kind of deep, unsettling groans that sounded too deliberate, like footsteps pressed into old wood. I told myself it was the house settling, but it didn't feel like that. It felt wrong. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, scraping. Faint, but steady, like nails dragging against wood. It was coming from the hall. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart hammering. The others were out, except for Ben, who was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was shallow. He must have heard it too. You hear that? I whispered. He didn't answer, just kept staring. The scraping continued. Closer. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the hallway. The moment the light hit it, the noise stopped. Nothing there. Ben finally spoke. I don't like this place. No shit. Morning came slow. None of us said much about the night, but we all looked like we hadn't slept. Tasha had dark circles under her eyes. Graham was uncharacteristically quiet, and Ben looked pale. Like sickly pale. By noon, we tried to shake it off. We went on a short hike, drank some beers, tried to act normal. It kinda worked, until we got back. The cabin door was open again. I felt it immediately. That deep, gut-level wrongness. Graham frowned. Did we leave it open? No one answered. We knew we hadn't. Ben walked in first, slow and cautious. The rest of us followed. Nothing seemed different at first, until we saw the basement door. The lock was gone. The heavy-duty padlock, the one that had been there yesterday, was lying on the floor, broken clean in half. Tasha whispered, "How does a lock break like that?" No one had an answer. The basement door was open just an inch. Enough to see pure, inky blackness beyond it. No light, no sound, just emptiness. I swallowed hard. We're leaving. Graham laughed, forced, nervous. Come on, dude, it's just... Then we heard it. From down below. A single, slow exhale. Like something breathing. Ben bolted. Tasha was right behind him. I grabbed my keys, my bag, anything I could carry in seconds. Graham hesitated, because of course he did, but when the breathing came again, this time closer, he moved. We ran for the truck. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the tree lean, just past the cabin. Tall. Still. Not moving. Not even shifting. Just watching. I nearly dropped my keys. Get in the damn truck. Tasha was already in. Ben too. Graham stumbled, but made it. I jumped in, slammed the door, turned the key. The engine sputtered. Didn't start. Inside the cabin, we heard something start moving. Fast. I turned the key again, desperate. A heavy thud hit the front porch. The engine roared to life. I hit the gas. And in the mirror, as we sped off, I saw it. A dark shape stepping out onto the porch. Tall. Watching. Grinning. And the basement door? Wide open. I drove like a maniac, barely able to see through the dirt and pine needles the tires kicked up. The Silverado bucked and groaned, fighting against the uneven road, but I kept the pedal down. Every instinct in me screamed, "Get the hell out of here." No one spoke. Ben was curled against the window, pale as death. Tasha was crying quietly. Graham just stared straight ahead, breathing hard. Like he finally understood we had screwed up bad. The forest felt tighter, the road longer. It should have taken 15 minutes to hit the main road, but it stretched like we were driving in circles. The further we got from the cabin, the darker it felt, like the trees were closing in, eating the light. Then the headlights flickered. Just a quick pulse. Dark, then back. What the hell was that? Tasha snapped, voice raw. I gritted my teeth. It's fine. Probably the alternator. It wasn't fine. The truck lurched, just for a second, like I'd hit something, but the road was clear. Nothing there. Then bang, bang, bang. Something slammed against the truck bed. 3 heavy hits, like fists pounding metal. Tasha screamed. Graham whipped around, staring out the back window. I didn't want to look, but I did. Something was back there. Not in the truck bed, but running behind us. It was fast. And worse, it was smiling. I couldn't make out details, just a shape, blacker than the dark around it. Long arms, that awful, stretched out grin. It wasn't human. Ben made a choking sound. Go faster. I slammed the gas, pushing the Silverado harder. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming, but I kept control. Trees blurred past. I didn't care if I wrecked, just as long as I got us out. Then, the road ended. No warning. No signs. Just a massive drop-off, like a landslide had wiped out the path. I cranked the wheel, barely stopping in time. The truck skidded sideways, tires spitting gravel, and we stopped just feet from the edge. Dust billowed up around us. I could hear everyone breathing, ragged, panicked. And then came the laughter. Slow. Wrong. It echoed from the trees, circling us, coming from all directions. Like it was inside our heads. I threw the truck in reverse, peeling away from the drop. I didn't know where I was going anymore, but I knew we couldn't stay there. It's playing with us, Ben whispered. He was right. The road should have been there. The forest shouldn't be this deep. But we weren't in the same place anymore. We had never left. I kept driving, but the road never ended. It just stretched, winding through the dark trees like it had swallowed us whole. The headlights barely cut through the mist curling along the ground, and every time I blinked, I swore the forest looked different. Ben stopped talking altogether. Tasha wouldn't stop whispering. This isn't real. This isn't real. Graham was quiet, but his hands were shaking so bad I could hear the fabric of his jeans rustling. Then, the lights flickered again, and this time, they didn't come back on. The truck died. Engine cut out. No power. No headlights. Just dead silence. I slammed the wheel. No. No, no, no. We sat there, breathing too loud in the dark. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Coming from behind the truck. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black. Dead. Then Tasha started crying harder. Jonas. Look. I turned. The rearview mirror showed the road behind us, but it wasn't empty anymore. The figure was standing there. Closer. It wasn't running anymore. It didn't have to. It had let us run. Let us think we could get away. Now it was just waiting. I grabbed the door handle, but my fingers wouldn't work. My brain screamed go, but my body wouldn't move. I could only watch as the thing tilted its head, like it was amused, like it was enjoying this. And then the truck doors unlocked. Click, 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 all four at once. I snapped out of it. Run. Tasha and Ben ripped their doors open first. Graham tripped, hit the dirt. I grabbed him, dragging him up as we all bolted for the trees. Behind us, the truck's engine turned on. By itself. Headlights blasted through the woods, bright as hell. The high beams caught glimpses of something huge, something shifting, something coming. Then, the truck drove away. I don't know how. I don't know what was in it. But we watched it roll off into the night, leaving us in the middle of nowhere. And then we heard the breathing. Right behind us. Ben screamed first. I grabbed him, pulled him forward, but he wasn't moving right. His limbs jerked like a puppet on tangled strings, his eyes rolling back. Then he was gone. Just gone. No scream. No sound. Just empty air where he had been. Tasha broke. She ran. Graham ran. I ran. I don't remember how long. I don't remember hitting the road. I just remember waking up in daylight, lying in the middle of the asphalt, blood in my mouth. Tasha and Graham were there too, just as wrecked as me. But Ben was gone. We tried to explain it to the cops. They found my truck, miles away, parked perfectly on the side of the road, engine still warm. No signs of damage. No footprints. Nothing. They never found Ben. And when we checked online for the rental listing of the cabin, it didn't exist. My name is Elias Grady, middle name James, and I've spent most of my 34 years on the road. Originally from San Antonio, Texas, I grew up in a family that never stayed in one place long. My old man was a mechanic, good with his hands, but always looking for the next gig, the next job, the next town. We never settled, and I guess that stuck with me. Even now, I don't do well with staying still. I work construction, temporary contracts, heavy lifting, a paycheck that doesn't ask questions. My ride is a 2011 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD, metallic blue, extended cab. She's old, but reliable, a little beat up, a few dents in the bumper, but the engine purrs like it did the day I bought her. She's gotten me through back roads, mountains, deserts, places where GPS stopped working and the world felt big again. That's why I was out here. I had a job lined up in Los Angeles, 3 weeks of work before heading back to Texas. Instead of getting a cheap motel outside the city, I figured I'd spend a night under the stars, one last bit of peace before the chaos of LA traffic and noise. So, I started looking for campgrounds on the way. That's how I found Black Ridge. The name popped up on an old camping forum, buried deep under hundreds of warnings. Creepy as hell, don't go there. Weird noises at night. Saw something moving near the ranger station. My buddy disappeared for 2 hours, swore he never left the tent. All the usual internet ghost story crap. But there was something else, too. No official records. No Park Service listings. Just scraps of information. Someone mentioned that Black Ridge wasn't supposed to exist anymore, which made me want to see it even more. I drove through the winding mountain roads outside Los Angeles, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to something barely resembling a road at all. My Silverado handled it fine, but the deeper I went, the quieter everything got. No traffic, no other cars, not even an old "Welcome to Black Ridge" sign. Just a long stretch of road that felt like it had been forgotten. I should have turned back when my radio started acting up. 1 second, I was listening to some classic rock station, the next, static. Then, something else. A voice. Faint. Garbled. Like someone whispering into an old mic, just out of range. I adjusted the dial, but it didn't help. The voice wasn't coming from the station. It was underneath it. I killed the radio. I wasn't scared. Not yet. But something in my gut twisted just a little. A mile later, I saw the entrance. A rusted gate stood half open, eaten by vines. The metal sign next to it had long since faded, but I could still make out the words. Black Ridge Campground, EST 1963. Someone had crossed out the numbers, deep scratch marks where the date used to be. I pulled in, tires crunching over gravel. Beyond the gate, the trees stretched tall and tight, swallowing the light. The whole place felt hollow, like even the wind didn't want to pass through. Then the road opened into a clearing. The first thing I saw was the ranger station, a 2-story wooden building, its roof partially caved in. The windows were black holes, no reflection, no sign of life. Beyond it, the campground stretched into the woods, fire pits overgrown with weeds, picnic tables cracked and warped from years of neglect. And then there were the cabins, 5 or 6 of them, scattered past the main clearing, their wooden frames still standing. But something about them felt wrong. Not just abandoned, like they were watching. I killed the engine. Silence. I sat there for a long moment, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. I'd camped in plenty of forgotten places before. Trails nobody used, motels where the lights flickered, gas stations with no attendant in sight. But this was different. The air was heavy, thick, like the whole place was holding its breath. I stepped out of the truck. Boots hit dirt, and that's when I heard it. A short, sharp sound. A knock. From inside the ranger station. I stood there, one hand still on the truck door, staring at the ranger station. The knock had been sharp and deliberate. Not the sound of wind, not an animal. Someone was inside. Or something. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. The smart thing would have been to get back in the truck and leave. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe pride, or maybe something deeper, something in the air itself pulling me forward. I grabbed my flashlight from the truck, flicked it on. Nothing moved. The forest behind me was a solid black wall. The cabins stretched out in eerie silence. The ranger station stood still, waiting. I took a step closer. Then another. A wooden porch wrapped around the front of the building, sagging in places, nails rusted and warped from time. The front door was open just a crack, wide enough to see the dark sliver of the hallway beyond. I called out, "Anyone in there?" Silence. I stepped up onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight. Then, the door moved. Just an inch. Like something had been standing behind it. Listening. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. Every instinct told me not to go in. Then a voice, low, scratchy, barely more than a whisper. Help. It came from inside. My breath hitched. It wasn't right. The way it sounded, like the words didn't belong to whoever was saying them. Like someone was just repeating them. I raised my flashlight, pushing the door open wider. The beam swept across dusty wooden floors, old chairs knocked over, papers scattered across a desk. An old map of the campground was tacked to the wall, edges curling from time. No people. No sign of anyone at all. I swallowed, stepping inside. The air was thick, stale. Something rotting, but faint. The kind of smell you only notice when you breathe too deep. I took a few more steps, shining the light toward the back of the room. There was a staircase leading up to the second floor. A door leading to what I assumed was a supply room. And then, at the end of the hall, a basement door. It was padlocked, but the lock wasn't new. It was bent, twisted, like something had tried to get out. A sharp bang echoed upstairs. I spun, light shaking in my hand. Footsteps, too fast, too heavy. Then a thud, like something dropping from the ceiling. My stomach knotted. That was it. I was done. I turned back toward the door, and the smell hit me full force. It wasn't just rot. It was something worse. Something wet, metallic. Blood. It was faint, but it was there. And that's when I saw them. Footprints. They started near the basement door. Dark. Heavy. Leading out. Leading toward me. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was off that porch, back in the clearing, my truck in sight. My breath came hard, sharp. Something was in there. Something that had been waiting. I yanked the truck door open, slid inside, locked it. My fingers drummed the steering wheel. Leave. Just leave. But my brain was stuck on what I'd seen. Footprints. Coming from the basement. And they hadn't been there when I walked in. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed. Didn't start. Come on, don't do this. I tried again. The engine choked, cranked, died. A sound outside. I froze. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Something worse. The soft creak of the ranger station door. Opening. I turned my head, slow, terrified, to look through the windshield. The front door was wide open now, but no one was there. The flashlight was still on the passenger seat, so I grabbed it, aimed it toward the station. The beam cut through the dark, scanned the porch. Nothing. Then the radio turned on. My breath caught. The truck's speakers, static at first, then that same faint, garbled voice from earlier. Help. The same word. The same unnatural tone. Then a second voice. A whisper just behind my ear. Don't. Look. My entire body went cold. I was alone. But I wasn't. The urge to turn my head was unbearable, every nerve in me screaming to check the back seat, to make sure no one was there. But I didn't. I forced my hand to turn the key one more time. The engine roared to life. The whisper was gone, and I did what I should have done the second I heard that knock. I got the hell out of there. I should have been relieved. I wasn't. The road twisted through the trees. No signs, no markers, just a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my truck. I kept glancing in the rear view, half expecting to see something standing in the road behind me. The headlights flickered. Once. Twice. Then, up ahead, a shape in the road. I slammed the brakes. Dirt kicked up, tires skidded. I blinked. There was nothing there. Just an empty road, stretching into the dark. But I swear, for a second, I saw someone standing there. Tall. Still. Watching. My heart hammered. I was losing it. Maybe there was never anything in that station. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe. Something scraped against the passenger side window. I didn't look. I hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, bouncing over potholes, branches whipping against the windshield. I kept going, didn't care if I wrecked, didn't care if I ended up in a ditch, just as long as I got out. And then, finally, the trees thinned. The gate. I was almost there. Then the headlights cut out. Just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. And in that second of perfect, absolute darkness, I saw it. Something running alongside my truck. Fast. Too fast. I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. It was right next to me, just outside the window. And it was grinning. The headlights flashed back on. Nothing there. But I was done. I shot through the open gate, fishtailing onto the highway, tires screaming against the pavement. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I never looked back. Not until I was 20 miles away, pulled over at some gas station on the edge of civilization, hands still shaking on the wheel. I reached for my phone, needing some kind of connection to reality. But my phone was dead. And the last thing I remembered before I left that place? The voice on the radio, whispering one last thing. See you soon. I sat in the truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The gas station's fluorescent lights hummed above me, buzzing like flies over something dead. I tried to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight, like my lungs weren't getting enough air. The world outside was still, just the empty highway stretching ahead, disappearing into the night. I should have been safe. I was miles away from Black Ridge, but my hands were still shaking, my skin still clammy, and the feeling hadn't left me. That awful, gnawing certainty that something had followed me. I reached for my phone again. Still dead. I plugged it into the truck's charger and turned the key just enough to give the battery power. The screen lit up, and for a second, I felt stupid for how relieved I was. I unlocked it, scrolling through my messages. No service. That made sense. I was still pretty far out. But when I went to my call log, my stomach turned. There was an outgoing call, 30 seconds long, time-stamped 10 minutes ago. I hadn't made a call. The number was all zeros. My thumb hovered over it. I didn't want to tap it. I didn't want to know if there was a voicemail. But some part of me, the same part that had kept me in that ranger station a second too long, wouldn't let it go. I tapped it. The voicemail screen popped up. One new message. I swallowed hard and pressed play. At first, there was nothing. Just dead air. But then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound, distant, but getting closer. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching over gravel. Then the breathing. It was wrong. Too heavy, too wet, as if someone with waterlogged lungs was forcing air in and out. Then, finally, the voice. A whisper, stretched and distorted, like it wasn't meant to be spoken through human vocal cords. Left the lights on. My body went cold. My truck. I had been in such a rush to get away, to put miles between me and that place, that I hadn't thought to check. The headlights had flickered. The engine had stalled. But what if it hadn't been a mechanical issue? What if something had been inside my truck the entire time? I turned slowly, dreading what I might see in the back seat. Nothing. Empty. But that didn't mean I was alone. I shoved my phone into my pocket and forced myself to focus. I needed to keep moving. Staying in one place felt dangerous. The gas station was old, just a single pump and a tiny convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. The attendant inside was half asleep, leaning against the counter with a magazine in his lap. I debated telling him, warning him that there was something out there. But what would I even say? Instead, I just filled up the tank, watching the highway, scanning the darkness. There were no cars, no sounds except the low hum of the station's lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. The back of my neck tingled, that primal instinct kicking in, telling me to run. I forced myself to move slow, casual, pretending like I wasn't on the verge of breaking down completely. I replaced the gas cap, climbed back into the truck, and pulled onto the highway. I drove. Fast. Too fast. The empty road stretched ahead, miles and miles of nothing. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights tailing me, or worse, that grinning face staring back at me. But the road remained empty. Maybe I'd really left it behind. Maybe whatever was out there had lost interest. Then the radio crackled back on. I hadn't touched it. Hadn't even realized it was still turned up. Static filled the cab, thick and buzzing, and underneath it, something else. A whisper. Low. Distant. Then, as clear as day, my own voice. Where are you going, Elias? I nearly ran off the road. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, my fingers clenching the wheel. The static cut out, the radio silent again, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to focus on the highway. I wasn't stopping. Not again. I wasn't letting it catch up. Then the truck lurched. A violent, sudden jerk as if something had grabbed the back bumper and pulled. I fought the wheel, trying to keep control as the tires skidded across the pavement. The engine sputtered, the lights flickered, and then darkness. The truck died. No power. No headlights. Just dead silence. I sat there, frozen, hands still gripping the wheel. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reached for the keys, but before I could turn them, I heard it. A slow, deliberate tapping on the driver's side window. My stomach dropped. The window was closed, the doors were locked, but that didn't matter. I knew, deep in my gut, that locks wouldn't keep this thing out. The tapping stopped. Then came the pressure. Something was leaning against the door, pressing against the frame like it was testing it, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. My breath was too loud. My pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't want to turn my head. I didn't want to see, but I knew I would. I always did. Slowly, carefully, I shifted my gaze toward the side mirror. And there it was. Not a face. Not eyes. Just a grin. Wide. Stretched. Too many teeth. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just smiled. I didn't think. I turned the key, praying, begging for the truck to start. The engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life. The headlights blazed on, and for a split second, the thing was gone. I didn't wait. I floored it, tires screeching against the pavement, speeding blindly down the road. My chest felt like it was collapsing, like I was breathing too fast, too shallow. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to check the mirrors, refusing to see if it was still there. It wasn't until I saw the bright sprawl of Los Angeles ahead that I finally let myself breathe. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for the first time since I'd left Black Ridge, I felt human again. I kept driving until I hit a motel on the outskirts, some rundown place with flickering neon lights, and a parking lot filled with semi-trucks. I pulled in, parked, and shut off the engine. My hands were still shaking. My entire body felt like it had been drained of energy, like something had taken a piece of me. I checked the back seat one last time. Still empty. But when I stepped out of the truck, I noticed something. The passenger side mirror. The glass was cracked, a single long scratch carved across the surface, like something had dragged a fingernail across it. I didn't sleep that night. I barely even moved. I sat in that dingy motel room, the buzzing neon sign outside throwing red light across the walls, my back pressed against the headboard, my gun on the nightstand next to me. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd made it out. Maybe I was just another guy with a bad story and a worse memory. But my gut told me otherwise. I kept staring at the cracked mirror on my truck, the scratch too deliberate, too perfect to be anything but a message. Whatever had followed me from Black Ridge wasn't finished yet. At some point, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep, just waking up with my head slumped forward, neck stiff. The red neon still flashed outside, but something was different. The air felt heavier. The room was too quiet. Even the hum of the motel's ice machine outside was gone. I checked my phone. 3:33 a.m. And then, the bathroom door creaked open. My stomach turned to stone. I hadn't used the bathroom since checking in. The door had been shut tight. But now, it was cracked open, just enough to see inside. The mirror above the sink faced me, but I couldn't see my reflection. Just the darkened doorway. I reached for my gun, slow, steady, every nerve in my body screaming at me to not look away. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened. Then, the voice came, right next to my ear. Not from the bathroom, not from outside, from the bed, right beside me. "You're in the wrong place, Elias." I jumped, spinning, gun raised. Nothing. The bed was empty, the sheets untouched. But the whisper had been right there, close enough that I should have felt breath on my skin. The bathroom door creaked wider. And then I saw it. Not in the room, not in the mirror, in the reflection of the motel window. A shadow, tall, grinning, standing directly behind me. I didn't think. I bolted, grabbing my keys, shoving my feet into my boots, barely getting the door unlocked before throwing myself outside into the cold night air. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, the gun still clenched in my hand. The parking lot was empty. No movement, no sound. Just the same old motel sign flashing in the dark. My truck sat where I'd left it. But something was wrong. The passenger door was open. My stomach twisted. I hadn't left it open. I knew that. I forced myself forward, each step slow, deliberate. I reached the door, peered inside. The cab was empty, but the radio was on. Static. Then, that same garbled whisper. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was many, and they were laughing. I slammed the door shut and got inside, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. I wasn't thinking anymore. I just had to get out. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, but the laughter in the radio didn't stop. Then, clear as day, over the static, I heard my own voice again. But this time, it wasn't a question. It was a promise. See you soon. I slammed the truck into drive and tore out of the parking lot, tires screaming against the pavement. I didn't stop. I didn't look in the mirrors. I just kept going, barreling down the highway, pushing the truck as fast as it would go. I didn't go back to Texas. I didn't go back home. I just kept moving, because something had followed me out of those woods, and it was still with me. People talk a lot about monsters in the dark, things lurking in the woods, waiting to snatch you up. But the truth is, the worst things out there aren't hiding in the shadows. They walk among us. They smile at you in gas stations. They hold the door open at motels. They blend in so well, you never see them coming. My name is Cole Huxley, middle name Thomas, 36 years old. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas, but for the last 10 years, I've worked as a long-haul trucker. I live out of my rig more than I do any apartment, always moving, never in one place long enough to put down roots. It suits me. I don't like people much. Never have. I drive a 2012 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD, black, crew cab. It's got about 200,000 miles on it, but I keep her in damn good shape. That truck's taken me through deserts, mountains, places where the road turns into nothing but dirt and sky. When I'm not in my rig, it's what I rely on to keep me moving. And on this trip, it's what kept me alive. I was headed to Los Angeles for a delivery. Nothing special, just another stop on the route before heading back east. I had time to kill, and I didn't feel like dealing with city traffic yet. So I took a detour, up into the mountains, looking for a quiet place to crash for the night. That's how I found Sable Canyon. It wasn't on my GPS hell. I wasn't even sure it was on any map. Just a turn off from the highway, leading up into winding roads and thick trees. It looked isolated, and that's all I cared about. I drove for about 40 minutes, the road getting rougher, the forest getting denser, pressing in on both sides like it was swallowing me. Finally, I saw a sign. Sable Canyon Retreat, private property. It looked old, half covered in vines, the paint peeling. Below it, a faded wooden arrow pointed down a side road. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. The road led to a small cluster of cabins, tucked deep into the woods. There were about 5 or 6 of them, all built from the same dark wood, with steep roofs and wraparound porches. They looked abandoned, but not completely rotted, like someone had kept them from falling apart, but hadn't actually lived there in a long time. I pulled up near the largest cabin, the one closest to the road. It had lights on. That stopped me. I sat in my truck for a long minute, just watching. I hadn't seen another car for miles. No signs of life. No noise except the wind moving through the trees. But inside that cabin, someone was home. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe just that stupid, human instinct to think we're always safe. But instead of driving away, I killed the engine, grabbed my bag, and walked up onto the porch. I knocked. No answer. I waited, then knocked again. The door swung open before my hand even touched it. I hesitated. Inside, it was dark. Too dark. The only light came from a single lamp in the corner, casting weird, stretched-out shadows across the wooden walls. And then, from the far end of the cabin, I heard a voice. Low. Flat. Did you come alone? My blood went cold. Something about the way he said it. Not friendly, not curious. Just confirming. I had made a mistake, and I had just stepped into it. I should have walked out right then, turned around, got in my truck, and left. But something about the way the man spoke, flat, emotionless, pinned me to the spot. I could barely make him out in the dim cabin. He stood near the far wall, just outside the glow of the lamp, his features hidden in shadow. Tall, thin, something off about the way he held himself. Too still, too deliberate. Did you come alone? He asked again. I hesitated. Lying felt safer. Meeting someone, I said, keeping my voice casual. They should be here soon. Silence. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at me. A cold weight settled in my gut. He didn't believe me. I forced a chuckle, shifting my bag higher on my shoulder. Look, man, I was just looking for a place to crash for the night. Didn't realize this was private property. I'll head out. I turned to leave, and he moved. Not toward me. Not fast. Just a single, slow step forward. Something about its scent iced down my spine. Like a predator testing its prey. "You don't have to leave," he said. His voice was still flat, but there was something behind it now. A weight, like he was waiting for me to make the wrong move. I kept my back to him, eyes locked on the open door. 5 steps to the porch, 10 to my truck. If I ran, could I make it? The floor creaked behind me. Another step. Closer. That was it. I bolted. I was out the door, down the porch, boots slamming against the dirt. I expected to hear him following. Expected footsteps pounding behind me, arms grabbing at my jacket. But there was nothing. I reached my truck, yanked open the door, and threw myself inside. My fingers fumbled with the keys. Come on. Come on. The engine roared to life, headlights spilling across the cabins. That's when I saw them. The other cabins. Lights on. Not just the one I'd been in. All of them. A moment ago, they had been dark, lifeless, abandoned. Now, a warm glow flickered behind every window. And in each one, a shadow stood. Watching. I felt the blood drain from my face. How long had they been there? I threw the truck into reverse, tires spitting dirt as I spun back toward the road. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to be gone. The Silverado bounced over the uneven path, shaking hard, headlights cutting through the dense trees. My pulse was a hammer in my ears, hands locked on the wheel. Then the lights flickered. Just for a second. The dashboard dimmed, the radio hissed with static. I gritted my teeth. No, not now. The trees blurred past. The road had to be close. Had to be. The truck lurched, like something had grabbed the back bumper and pulled. I slammed the gas, pushing the Silverado harder. And that's when I saw the shape in the road ahead. A person, standing dead center, blocking the way. I yanked the wheel, barely missing them. The truck skidding sideways onto a narrow trail. The wheels hit something soft, mud maybe? Loose gravel? Then I realized. It wasn't mud. The truck was sinking. I slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The front end dipped, the tires losing traction, the weight of the truck pulling me down. Then, the driver's side door yanked open. Hands, too many hands, grabbed at me, dragging me from the cab. I barely had time to fight. And then everything went black. I woke up to the feeling of something pressing down on my chest. Not a weight, not hands, but pressure. Like I was being squeezed from the inside out, lungs straining for air. My head pounded. My vision swam. For a second, I thought I was still in my truck, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the truth. I was back inside the cabin, the same one I had run from. The glow of the single lamp flickered against the walls, its dim light casting long, twisted shadows. My arms were tied. Thick rope dug into my wrists and ankles, biting into my skin. I was strapped to a chair in the center of the room, facing the doorway. My truck keys were gone. My phone was gone. And worst of all, I wasn't alone. The man from before stood a few feet away, watching me with an expression that was impossible to read. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He just looked patient, like he had all the time in the world. Behind him, in the darker parts of the room, others stood, half hidden by the shadows. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. I swallowed hard. What the hell is this? The man didn't answer. He just tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out yet. "You shouldn't have come here," he finally said. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The ropes cut into my skin as I struggled, the chair creaking beneath me. "I'm leaving. Let me go, and you'll never see me again." Silence. Then footsteps. Someone stepped forward from the dark. A woman. Her hair was pulled back tight, her clothes simple, almost outdated, like she belonged to a different time. She crouched in front of me, resting her arms on her knees. "You don't understand where you are, do you?" Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "This isn't just some abandoned campground. It's a place with rules." I clenched my jaw. "I don't care about your damn rules. I just want to leave." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're already part of it now." A cold sweat broke across my skin. The man behind her, the first one I'd seen, moved closer, the light finally hitting his face. And that's when I realized what had been bothering me about him from the start. His eyes. They weren't right. Too pale, too glassy, like he wasn't actually looking at me, but through me. The woman sighed, almost disappointed. "You really did come alone, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Because I knew, no matter what I said, they already knew the truth. She nodded, standing up. "That makes this easier." The man reached into his pocket, pulling something out. A knife. Old, rusted, the kind used for gutting deer. He ran his thumb along the edge, testing the blade, then stepped toward me. I thrashed, chair legs scraping against the wooden floor. Wait! A sound outside. Faint but unmistakable. A truck engine. Not mine. The woman froze. The others in the shadows turned toward the sound. Then, without a word, they moved. All at once. I'd never seen people move like that. Fast, silent, precise. They weren't startled. They weren't panicked. They were prepared. The door swung open, and they disappeared into the night. I didn't know who had just arrived, but I knew one thing. This was my only chance. I didn't waste time wondering who had just pulled up outside. It didn't matter. Whoever they were, they had just given me my only shot at getting out of here. My wrists burned as I twisted against the rope, my fingers straining to find any slack. The chair creaked beneath me, shifting slightly, but the knots were tight. Too tight. I wasn't getting out of this on my own. The cabin had gone silent. The woman and the others had vanished into the night, leaving me alone. Outside, the engine rumbled, steady, idling. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't hear voices, didn't hear footsteps, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the distant hum of tires on dirt. Then, suddenly, the truck shut off. I held my breath. Whoever had arrived was here now, on foot. Were they a visitor? Another camper? Or were they part of this? A floorboard groaned on the porch. I tensed, heart hammering. The door was still wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze, and I saw the shadow stretch long before the person actually stepped inside. A man, older, maybe in his 50s. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty flannel and heavy boots. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was something about the way he carried himself that set me on edge. He wasn't afraid. He knew exactly where he was. His gaze flicked to me, tied to the chair, then to the room. The overturned table, the single lamp, the knife left behind on the floor. He didn't look surprised. His lips parted slightly. Not quite a frown. Not quite a smile. Looks like you got yourself into some trouble. I swallowed hard, my throat raw. They tied me up. He didn't react right away. Just tilted his head slightly, considering. Yeah, that happens out here. That wasn't the answer I wanted. He stepped closer, boots slow against the wood. I flinched. I didn't mean to, but I did, and he caught it. Something in his expression shifted. Just a flicker, like he'd seen something he recognized. He crouched down, taking out a hunting knife from his belt. My whole body went rigid, but he didn't raise it toward me. Instead, he hooked the blade under the ropes, slicing through them in one clean motion. The second my wrists were free, I yanked my arms forward, the skin raw and stinging. My legs came next, the ropes loosening. I was up and moving before I even processed it. The man stood, tucking his knife away. Truck's outside. If you want to live, you get in. Now, that was all I needed. I bolted out the cabin door, half expecting to see them waiting for me. The woman, the others, their glass-eyed stares watching from the tree line. But the clearing was empty. The wind howled through the canyon, shaking the branches, but no one was there. For now, the truck sat near the porch. An old Ford, faded green, dinted on the driver's side. The doors were unlocked. I threw myself into the passenger seat without thinking, slamming it shut, reaching for the lock. The man climbed in next to me, moving slow, unbothered. He started the engine. The headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness. Then I saw them, not far down the road, just past the tree line, standing in a loose circle, their faces blank. Still, watching. The woman was at the front, arms at her sides. Behind her, the tall man. More of them now. Too many. And they weren't moving. I grabbed the dash. Go. The man didn't hesitate. The truck lurched forward, tires kicking up dirt as we shot toward the road. I twisted in my seat, watching them disappear into the dark. They didn't chase us. They didn't even move. They didn't have to. I knew this wasn't over. I just didn't know how bad it was about to get. The truck barreled down the dirt road, bouncing over potholes and uneven ground, the headlights cutting through the dense night like a blade. My breathing was ragged, my hands clenched so tight on my knees that my knuckles ached. The man beside me drove like he'd done this before, like he knew exactly where to go, exactly how fast he could push the truck before losing control. I wanted to ask who he was, why he'd helped me, what the hell those people back there were, but my brain felt scrambled, like I had barely made it out of a dream that hadn't fully let me go. Instead, I kept glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see figures running behind us, keeping pace, their glassy eyes locked on me. But there was nothing. Just the darkness swallowing the trees, the night stretching on forever. I finally found my voice. Who the hell were they? It came out rough, shaky, but the man didn't answer right away. He just kept his eyes on the road, his fingers tapping against the wheel in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Then he exhaled sharply, shaking his head like he was deciding whether or not to bother telling me the truth. They call themselves a family, he said at last, his voice calm in a way that made my stomach turn. But they ain't related. Not by blood, anyway. He let the words hang in the air, as if that explained anything. I wiped my hands down my jeans, still feeling the phantom weight of the ropes that had bound me, still tasting the stale air of that cabin. You're saying it's a cult? I asked, my voice rising, anger bleeding into my exhaustion. They didn't act like a cult. They didn't pray. They didn't chant. They just... I stopped myself, shuddering at the memory of the way they stood there, watching, waiting. The man smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was something colder, something edged with familiarity. You think cults have to be loud? You think they have to sing hymns and drink poison? Nah. Some of them, the real dangerous ones, they don't need all that. They just need each other. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he knew them, like he had been around long enough to see what they were really capable of. He turned his head slightly, finally looking at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. They let you go easy, he said, almost like a question. That ain't normal. I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. He was right. They could have killed me. They could have taken me apart, left me rotting in the woods, and no one would have ever found me. But they didn't. They let me run. They let me get away. Or at least, they made it seem that way. My mouth felt dry as the question formed on my tongue. Why? The man exhaled through his nose, eyes back on the road, expression unreadable. Maybe they wanted you to think you got away, he muttered. Maybe they just like watching. I shuddered, rubbing at my arms as if that would shake the feeling of being observed. I knew what he meant. That woman, the way she spoke to me, the way she looked at me, she had known something I didn't. This wasn't over. It was never over. We hit pavement, the transition from dirt road to asphalt jarring, as if I had crossed some invisible threshold. It felt like the moment you wake up from a nightmare, heart hammering, sweat on your skin, only to realize that the feeling of something watching you hasn't gone away. I knew, deep down, that I wasn't free of them. They had let me go for a reason. I just didn't know what it was. The man drove into the next town without another word. It was a small, nameless stretch of gas stations and motels, the kind of place truckers stopped to rest before pushing on to the next state. He pulled into a lot, parking in front of a diner that was still open, its neon sign flickering in and out of existence. He killed the engine, then turned to me. "This is where we part ways," he said. I stared at him. "That's it." My voice cracked, frustration bubbling under my exhaustion. "You show up, cut me loose, and now I'm just supposed to pretend none of this happened?" He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "Ain't got nothing else to tell you," he admitted. "You got out. That's more than most can say." He opened his door and stepped out, stretching his arms like he hadn't just dragged me out of some waking nightmare. I hesitated, then followed, my legs still shaky, my body still in fight or flight mode. The cool night air hit me, and for the first time since I had stepped foot in that cursed canyon, I felt like I could breathe. But the relief was short-lived, because as I turned toward the gas station across the street, my body locked up. There, standing by the pumps. A figure, not running, not approaching, just watching. The flickering gas station light cast long, unnatural shadows across the lot, but even from here, I could see the smile. Wide, knowing, waiting. I took a slow, deliberate step back, my heart slamming against my ribs. They followed me. The man beside me didn't look surprised. He just sighed, like he had seen this 100 times before. "Yeah," he muttered. "They do that." I turned back toward him, panic rising in my throat. "What do I do?" He shrugged. "Keep moving." I swallowed hard, glancing over my shoulder again. The figure was still there, still grinning. I had left Sable Canyon behind, but I hadn't left them. They had never needed to chase me, because they already knew where I was going, and they would always be one step ahead. Los Angeles is a city of ghosts, not the kind that rattle chains or whisper through walls. The real ghosts here are the forgotten, the people who disappear, not because they were taken, but because no one bothered to look for them. My name is Daniel Vance, middle name Christopher, 38 years old. Grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, but that place never felt like home. Nowhere does. I've been living out of my truck for the past 2 years, going where the work is, where the weather is tolerable, where the cops won't hassle me for sleeping in a parking lot. It wasn't always like this. I used to have a life, a house, a wife. But people disappear in other ways too. Sometimes, they just stop looking at you. I drive a 2009 Chevrolet Silverado 1500, dark green, extended cab. It's not much, but it keeps me moving. The back seat is piled with my life, duffel bags, an old cooler, a blanket that still smells like the last place I stayed. There's an empty seat beside me, but I still glance over sometimes like she's still there. Like she ever would be again. I came to Los Angeles for a job. A guy I knew from back in Phoenix had worked for me. Demolition, nothing special, just tearing down an old gas station that was probably full of asbestos and bad memories. It paid just enough to keep the truck running, to keep me fed. But the job didn't start for another day, and I had nowhere to go in the meantime. Hotels were out of the question. Cheap motels meant sharing walls with tweakers and dealers. That left me with the same option I always had. Find somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would care if I parked overnight. That's how I found Black Hollow Road. It was a stretch of nothing, just a forgotten road that curled up into the hills, past half-built housing developments that had been abandoned when the market crashed. No streetlights, no traffic, just empty shells of houses with plywood windows. The kind of place where people dump stolen cars and pretend they don't hear the screams from the woods. I didn't care. I just needed sleep. I pulled onto the shoulder, killed the engine. The silence settled in thick, the kind that felt unnatural. There weren't even crickets. Just the occasional gust of wind rattling the skeletons of unfinished houses. I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the worn leather seat, rubbing at my face. I needed to stop thinking, stop remembering. I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. Took a long drink. Let the burn settle deep. Another night. Another nothing. Then I saw her. She was standing in the road, just ahead of my truck. A girl. Maybe 16, maybe younger. Barefoot. Pale. Dressed in a thin white nightgown that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was dark, tangled, like she'd been running. And she was staring straight at me. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that look. The same hollow, lost expression I'd seen on people who had nowhere left to go. I set the bottle down, wiped my mouth, and reached for the door handle. And then, she moved. Not toward me. Away. She turned and walked into the unfinished neighborhood, disappearing into the shadows of skeletal houses. Something in me screamed to leave. But something else, something buried deep and broken, wouldn't let me. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the truck, and followed her into the dark. The night air was colder than I expected. That first step away from my truck felt like stepping onto a different planet, one where everything was too quiet, too still. The girl had vanished into the shadows between the half-built houses, her white nightgown the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed her. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong. I had spent enough nights on the road, in places where people shouldn't be, to know that nothing good ever came from following a stranger into the dark. But I didn't get back in my truck. I didn't drive away. Maybe it was the whiskey dulling my common sense. Maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't put into words. That girl looked lost, and I knew what that felt like. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment, clicked it on, and moved forward. The houses loomed around me, nothing but frames and exposed beams, unfinished dreams left to rot in the elements. The whole place felt forgotten, like it had been built in some other lifetime, abandoned before it even had a chance to become something real. My boots crunched over gravel as I stepped between the skeletal structures, sweeping the flashlight across empty doorways and shattered windows. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the hollow feeling of being in a place that wasn't meant to be visited. I turned a corner, passing the remains of what was probably meant to be a driveway, and caught a glimpse of white in the distance. The girl, standing at the far end of the street, just inside the doorway of an unfinished house. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even acknowledge me. She just stood there, half hidden in the dark, waiting. I hesitated. Something about the way she stood, the way her hair hung limp over her shoulders, bothered me. She wasn't looking for help. She wasn't afraid. She was expecting me. I took another step forward, and the moment my foot hit the ground, she turned and disappeared inside the house. I muttered a curse under my breath, but I kept going. The house was barely more than a frame, its walls exposed, its floor covered in a thin layer of dirt and debris. There was no furniture, no signs that anyone had ever lived here. Just a husk of a place that had never been finished. The flashlight beam swept across the room, catching the unfinished staircase leading to the second floor. My pulse quickened. At the top of the stairs, just barely visible in the dim light, was the girl. She stood still, her bare feet visible on the dusty wood, her thin frame half concealed by the shadows. But something was wrong. Her head was tilted too far to the side, like her neck was bending at an unnatural angle. My stomach twisted. "Hey," I called out, my voice rough in the silence. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't blink. Then she took a step back, not like someone walking, like something pulling her. My grip tightened on the flashlight. Every instinct told me to leave, to turn around and pretend I had never come here. But I wasn't thinking straight. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe the loneliness, maybe something deeper that I didn't want to admit. I put one foot on the first step. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Not near the girl. Behind her. I froze. Something else was in that house. Something I hadn't seen yet. Something I wasn't supposed to see. And before I could move, before I could even think, I heard a whisper. "Close. Too close. You shouldn't be here." The flashlight flickered, and the house went completely dark. The second the light cut out, a deep, primal panic set in. Not the kind of fear that comes with paranoia or bad decisions. This was something else. A raw, animal terror that came from knowing you had made a mistake you couldn't take back. I stood there in the pitch black, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. The air inside the house had changed, grown heavier, thicker, like something unseen had just slithered in and taken up the empty space around me. I fumbled with the flashlight, slapping it against my palm, my breath coming fast. My boots scuffed against the floor as I turned toward the entrance, but the second I moved, I heard it. The sound of something shifting upstairs. Slow, deliberate. Not the girl. Something bigger. The whisper came again, this time directly behind me. "You're not supposed to be here." My body locked up, every muscle screaming at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. My breath was too loud, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break free. I forced myself to move, to back up toward where I knew the door was. But the second I did, something moved with me. Not footsteps. Something sliding, dragging. The flashlight flickered weakly back to life for half a second, and in that brief flash of light, I saw it. A shape at the top of the stairs. Not the girl. Something else. Tall, hunched, with limbs that seemed too long, its head bent at an unnatural angle. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of something wrong. And then the light died again. The air shifted, and then it moved. Fast. Too fast. I didn't think. I turned and ran. I sprinted for the doorway, my boots slamming against the floor, my breath tearing out of my throat in ragged gasps. The moment I reached the threshold, the air behind me shifted again, like something had lunged, barely missing me. I stumbled into the dirt outside, falling to my hands and knees, my entire body trembling. I scrambled back up, whipping around to face the house, expecting to see something standing there, watching me. But there was nothing. The house stood dark and silent, its doorway yawning open like a hungry mouth. The girl was gone. The thing I had seen, if I had really seen it, was nowhere to be found. The only sound was the wind, carrying the distant hum of the city far below. I staggered back, breath still shaky, my hands coated in dust and sweat. My truck. I needed to get to my truck. I turned, my body still moving on instinct, and that's when I saw her. Not in the house. Not standing in the doorway. Closer. Right beside my truck. The girl stood perfectly still, her white nightgown barely moving in the wind. Her hair fell over her face, but I could still see the way her lips were moving, soundlessly forming words I couldn't hear. A cold chill washed over me. She hadn't run. She had been waiting for me. I forced my legs to move, to take slow, deliberate steps toward the truck, keeping my eyes locked on her. What the hell is this? My voice sounded small wrong. The question wasn't for her. wasn't for anyone in particular. It just came out because I couldn't understand what was happening. She didn't answer, didn't blink, just kept whispering. Then, in the reflection of the truck's window, I saw something move behind me. Something tall, something grinning. The second I saw it, the girl stopped whispering. Her mouth snapped shut, and she looked at me, not blankly, not lost, like she was waiting for me to realize that it had never been her I needed to be afraid of. I didn't turn around. I didn't look. I just opened the door, jumped inside, and slammed the lock down. My fingers fumbled with the keys, shoving them into the ignition, twisting hard. The engine roared to life, headlights blazing through the darkness, cutting across the houses. And in that split second, I saw what had been standing behind me. Not human, not even close. Its grin stretched wider than its face. I floored the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, spitting dirt and gravel as I shot down the road, my breath ragged, my entire body shaking. In the mirror, the girl stood exactly where she had been. Still, silent, watching me leave. But the thing behind her, that was moving, and it was keeping up. The truck roared down Black Hollow Road, tires spitting gravel, the frame rattling as I pushed the speed past anything reasonable. My hands were slick on the wheel, my breathing too fast, too shallow. The road twisted through the hills, but I barely saw it. I was too busy watching the mirror. It was still there. Not the girl. The thing. It wasn't running. It wasn't chasing me like a man would, like a predator with muscles and bones that had to obey the rules of motion. It was gliding. Its body barely moved, like it was being pulled along by something unseen, something underneath the road. But the worst part? It was grinning. The headlights only caught flashes of it in the dust storm I was kicking up, but I could see the way its mouth stretched too wide, how its limbs seemed to shift and lengthen, flickering between human and something else entirely. It wasn't behind me. It was with me. Every second that passed, I felt it getting closer. Not physically. No, it was still the same distance behind the truck, but inside my head, inside my bones, like it was bleeding into me, turning my own thoughts against me. I gritted my teeth, forced my focus back onto the road. If I missed a turn, if I hit a ditch at this speed, I was dead. But if I slowed down, if I let it reach me, I didn't want to find out what happened then. The Silverado slammed over a pothole, the suspension groaning, my body jerking against the seatbelt. A small part of my brain was screaming, "You're going to crash, slow down, you're going to die this way." But the rest of me knew that was the better option. The mirror flashed again, and this time, it was closer. Not much. Maybe a few inches. Maybe less. But I knew it hadn't moved forward. It had just shrunk the space between us, like it was bending the distance itself. My pulse pounded in my ears. The road stretched out ahead, twisting through the hills, the city lights far in the distance. If I could just make it back to civilization, if I could just reach a gas station, a motel, anywhere with people. The radio cut on. I didn't touch it. I hadn't even realized it was still powered. But now, through the static, something garbled and broken whispered through the speakers. "You're taking too long, Daniel." I nearly slammed the brakes. It knew my name. I gripped the wheel harder, my knuckles bone white. "Shut up," I growled, barely recognizing my own voice. "Shut the hell up." The whispering didn't stop. The words weren't in English anymore. Or maybe they were, but my brain couldn't hold on to them, couldn't make sense of the sounds. But the meaning sank in, pressing against my skull. "You're already mine." Something hit the truck. Hard. The entire vehicle lurched sideways, the wheel jerking in my grip. I fought to keep it steady, skidding on loose dirt, the back end fishtailing dangerously close to the edge of the road. A steep drop loomed past the guardrail, too steep to survive. Another hit. The passenger door dented inward. I didn't see what it was. Didn't need to. It was right next to me now. I did the only thing I could do. I braked hard, spun the wheel, and sent the truck into a controlled skid. The Silverado screamed as the tires lost traction, the back end whipping around in a cloud of dust. The whole truck swung sideways across the road, momentum dragging me toward the edge, but I stopped. The front bumper kissed the guardrail, metal groaning. But I was still on the road, still alive. For a second, I thought it was gone. The road was empty. The mirror showed nothing but dust and darkness. But then, a tap on the window. I turned my head, and it was right there, leaning against the passenger side glass. Close enough that I should have seen its breath, should have seen something human about it. But there was nothing. Just a long, grinning face and holes where its eyes should have been. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I hit the gas. The truck screamed forward, smashing through the guardrail, metal snapping like twigs. The front wheels left the road, and for a second, I was airborne. I barely registered the fall. Barely felt the moment the truck slammed into the hillside below, scraping down the rocky slope in a violent, bone-rattling descent. And then, impact. Everything went black. I woke up in darkness and pain. Every inch of me ached. My body pressed into the crumpled remains of the truck's cab. The windshield was shattered, spiderweb fractures spreading across the glass like veins, but somehow it had held. The Silverado was on its side, the passenger door crushed inward, jagged metal curling where the frame had buckled. I was alive, but my whole body screamed against the fact. Blood trickled down the side of my face, thick and warm, soaking into my shirt. My hands trembled as I reached for the seatbelt, fingers fumbling against the latch. The air was filled with the sound of my own ragged breathing, but beneath it, something else. Something moving. The weight of what had happened pressed in on me. I had driven off the road, sent the truck tumbling down the rocky slope in a desperate attempt to escape, but I hadn't made it far enough. The incline had slowed my descent, left me battered but not broken, and that meant it could still reach me. My breath hitched as I forced myself upright, trying to ignore the shards of glass digging into my palms. The flashlight was gone. The glove box had burst open, spilling papers and old receipts across the dashboard, but I didn't need to see to know I wasn't alone. A low sound, like breath being drawn too slowly, too deliberately, filled the cab. Not behind me, not outside, inside. I turned my head, my pulse hammering against my skull, and in the dim slant of moonlight that spilled through the wreck, I saw it. Sitting in the ruined passenger seat, its body contorted to fit in the crushed space, arms resting in its lap as if it had always been there. And it was grinning. That same impossibly wide mouth, stretching too far, lips curled in something that wasn't amusement but understanding. Like it had known all along this is where I would end up. The sockets where its eyes should have been were hollow, empty, but I could feel it watching me. It didn't speak, didn't move, just waited. And that was worse. It was letting me understand, letting me feel the weight of what was about to happen. I lunged for the door handle, fingers slipping against the twisted metal, wrenching it open with everything I had left. The door groaned as it gave way, and I tumbled out onto the dirt, my body rolling down the last few feet of the slope. My knees hit hard, my palms scraping against the rough ground, but I didn't stop. I forced myself up, breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The truck was behind me, its frame bent, headlights still flickering weakly against the hillside. The cab was empty. The thing wasn't there anymore. I spun, searching, my eyes darting to every shadow, every stretch of darkness between the rocks. Nothing. Just the wind howling through the canyon, the distant glow of the city far below. For a second, I thought maybe I had escaped. Maybe the wreck had broken whatever hold it had over me. Maybe. Then I felt it. A presence. Not behind me. Not around me. Inside me. The cold bloomed in my chest first, then spread like ink through my veins, curling into my limbs, rooting into the marrow of my bones. My breath hitched. My vision blurred. I staggered, my body suddenly too heavy, too foreign. The world around me seemed to twist, stretch, like I was seeing it through the wrong end of a telescope. And then I heard it. Not with my ears. With my mind. With something deeper. You never left, Daniel. I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. The cold tightened around my ribs, creeping up my spine, pressing into my skull until I could feel it shifting behind my own thoughts. My hands curled, my breath slowed, and in the shattered reflection of my truck's side mirror, I saw my own face. And I was grinning. The kind of grin that stretched too wide. The kind of grin that said I wasn't me anymore. And somewhere in the back of my mind, drowning beneath the weight of whatever had taken my place, I screamed. But no one heard, because I was already gone. The thing about driving at night is that your mind starts playing tricks on you. The highway turns into an endless loop, mile after mile of the same dark pavement, the same faded lane markings, the same damn shadows stretching across the road. After a while, you start seeing things in them. Or maybe you start seeing what was already there. My name is Eric Holloway, middle name James, 31 years old. Born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, but I've spent the last few years bouncing from one city to another. I do long-haul deliveries, the kind of jobs that keep you on the road for days, sometimes weeks, without seeing a familiar face. I don't mind it. Driving keeps me moving, keeps me from thinking too much. I drive a 2013 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD, black, crew cab, still holding up despite the miles I've put on it. The front bumper's a little dented from a run-in with a deer outside Albuquerque, and there's a crack in the passenger side mirror that I never got around to fixing. I tell myself it's because I don't care, but the truth is, I don't like looking into it. Something about the way the glass distorts reflections makes me uneasy. I was headed west on Highway 138, just outside Los Angeles, working a late-night job hauling a trailer full of auto parts. The company I was working for needed the delivery before sunrise, which meant I had to keep moving. I'd done plenty of late-night drives before, and they usually didn't bother me. But tonight, something was wrong. It started small. A hitchhiker on the side of the road. I barely caught a glimpse of him in my high beams, a tall figure in a dark hoodie, standing just outside the shoulder. He didn't have his thumb out, didn't turn to face me, just stood there. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something about the way he was positioned, too stiff, too unnatural. Like he wasn't really waiting for a ride. Like he was waiting for something else. I shook it off, kept driving. But a few miles later, I saw him again. Same posture, same hoodie, same exact spot. I blinked hard, rubbed at my eyes. No way. No way I'd just driven 10 miles and ended up in the same place. The highway was a straight shot. No turns, no loops. I checked my GPS, but the screen was frozen. The little blue arrow wasn't moving. My hands tightened on the wheel. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain was glitching out, filling in gaps where the monotony of the road had blurred together. I took a sip of stale gas station coffee, shook my head. Just keep going. A few minutes later, I checked the mirror and nearly ran off the road. He was sitting in my back seat. For a single, heart-stopping second, I saw his hooded figure in the reflection of the cracked mirror, sitting completely still. I jerked the wheel, sending the truck skidding onto the shoulder, my pulse slamming into my ribs. The tires kicked up dust, the trailer groaning as it shifted behind me. I threw the truck into park, breath coming fast and uneven. I turned around. Nothing. The back seat was empty. The truck creaked as I sat there, staring into the dark, my mind struggling to make sense of what I had just seen. The air inside the cab was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. I wiped sweat off my forehead, forced my breathing to slow. I was tired. That was it. Just tired. Then, from the road ahead, I saw it again. Not the hitchhiker. The shape in the distance. Tall. Unmoving. Waiting. And this time, he was closer. I sat there for too long, fingers clenched around the wheel, breath coming too fast. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for the figure standing dead center in the road. He was close enough now that I could make out details I shouldn't have been able to see from this distance. The way his hoodie hung loose over his shoulders. The curve of his jaw, sharp beneath the shadows. The fact that he had no face. I blinked, and for half a second, the world stuttered. A glitch, like my brain couldn't process what it was seeing. When my vision snapped back into place, he was gone. The road was empty again. My mouth was dry. I swallowed hard, forced my hands to stop shaking. I needed to go. Needed to get the hell out of there before my mind collapsed in on itself. I shifted back into drive, pulling off the shoulder, the truck groaning as it fought against the weight of the trailer. The headlights cut through the darkness, exposing the empty stretch of highway ahead. My GPS was still frozen, stuck on a part of the map I had passed miles ago, and my radio crackled faintly with a sound that wasn't static. A whisper. I reached over, turned the radio off. The road felt wrong now. The hum of my tires on the pavement, the faint rattle of tools in the glove compartment. Everything was too loud. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see the hitchhiker's hooded figure appear in the back seat again. I knew he wasn't there, but my body wouldn't let go of the fear. Then I saw the lights. At first, I thought it was another car, another truck coming up behind me. Headlights in the mirror, flickering. But the longer I watched, the less sense it made. The lights weren't following the road. They were shifting, blinking from one side of the highway to the other, too fast, too erratic. Like whatever was behind me didn't need roads. My grip tightened. My gut twisted into knots. I didn't want to look too long. Something in my bones told me that if I focused, if I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, it would become real. I pressed harder on the gas. The Silverado rumbled beneath me, speed climbing. The trailer groaned under the acceleration, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. I needed something to make sense again. But it didn't stop. The lights kept moving. And then, they were gone. Darkness. Silence. Then the whisper came again, directly in my ear. "Where are you going, Eric?" I nearly swerved off the road. The wheel jerked under my hands as I corrected, my breath slamming against my ribs. No one else was in the truck, but someone had just spoken. I checked the mirror, expecting the worst. And this time, I saw everything. The hitchhiker was back, not inside the truck, not on the road, running alongside me. I was doing 75, and he was keeping up. His hoodie whipped in the wind, his body moving with an unnatural ease, his face still blurred like a corrupted image. But this time, he was looking at me, and he was grinning. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The truck roared forward, the trailer jerking violently behind me as I pushed past 80, past 85. The engine strained, the frame shuddered, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let it reach me. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The road stretched empty again, the air inside the cab thick with something I didn't understand. My body was trembling, sweat slicking my neck. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my hands steady on the wheel. I had to keep driving. But the worst part wasn't what I had seen. It was what I had felt. The moment before it vanished, before the world snapped back into place, it had been inside the truck with me. Just for a second. Just long enough to whisper my name. I kept driving, pushing the Silverado past speeds that made my trailer sway dangerously, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away as possible from whatever the hell I had seen. My hands were still clamped around the wheel, knuckles aching, my breath coming out in short, uneven gasps. My mind was trying to rationalize, trying to tell me that maybe it was exhaustion, maybe my brain was misfiring after too many nights on the road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. You don't hallucinate something like that. You don't imagine a figure keeping up with a truck going 75 miles per hour, grinning like it knew something you didn't. That was real. That thing had been real. The highway stretched on ahead, empty, the painted lane dividers flashing under my headlights in a rhythmic pulse. I forced myself to focus on them, to use them as an anchor, but the air inside the cab felt wrong. Heavy, almost thick, like I wasn't alone. My skin prickled with the feeling of being watched, that undeniable sensation of someone, or something, sitting just out of sight. I wanted to turn my head, wanted to check the back seat, but I was too afraid of what I might see. Then, the radio clicked on by itself. At first, it was just static, hissing through the speakers, but beneath it, a whisper. My body tensed so hard it felt like my spine would snap. I turned the dial, trying to shut it off, but the knob wouldn't move. It just kept playing, the whisper growing clearer, turning into something almost human, but not quite. It was saying something, repeating it over and over, but my mind refused to make sense of the words. The sound crawled under my skin, into my bones, like a parasite burrowing deep. Not far now, Eric. My stomach clenched. It knew my name. It knew me. The headlights flickered, just for a second, the whole world outside going black before snapping back into place. My pulse spiked. The road ahead was still clear, but the shadows at the edges of my vision felt closer. I gritted my teeth, forcing my foot down harder on the gas pedal, trying to outrun whatever the hell was happening. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. 1 second, the air inside the truck was normal, the faint smell of coffee and dust lingering like it always did, and then, freezing. My breath came out in visible puffs, fogging the windshield slightly. The seat under me felt like ice. The cold seeped into my bones, into my blood, like something was draining the heat from inside me. And then I saw it again. Not ahead of me this time. Not outside the truck. In the mirror. The hitchhiker was in the back seat. My entire body locked up. He was closer this time, leaning forward just slightly, his hood still pulled up, but I could see the edges of his face. The sickly pale skin stretched too tight over his skull. The corners of his mouth curled up, widening into that same awful grin. Teeth too sharp, too many. His head tilted slowly, and then his lips parted, revealing something black inside. A void, an absence of anything human. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My reflection was still staring ahead, but I wasn't in control of it anymore. I felt something shift inside me, a pull, like something unseen had hooked itself into my ribs and was slowly, methodically reeling me in. Then, without thinking, I reached for the rearview mirror, and I turned it away. The second I did, the weight in my chest loosened. I gasped, my lungs finally working again, my grip tightening on the wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I didn't dare check the back seat, didn't dare look in any of the other mirrors. I just kept driving, blindly, desperately, toward the lights of the city in the distance. The whispering stopped. The static faded, but the cold remained. I knew it wasn't gone. I knew it was still with me. And I knew, deep down, that whatever it was, whatever had crawled into the cab of my truck, it wasn't going to let me go. The Silverado shook violently as I pushed it harder, the engine groaning under the strain. The speedometer climbed past 90, past 95, but it wasn't fast enough. I didn't know how I knew that, but I did. Some instinct buried deep in my bones told me that no matter how fast I went, no matter how far I got, I wasn't outrunning this. The lights of Los Angeles flickered in the distance, a sprawling glow against the black horizon. Almost there. If I could just make it to the city, to the streets crowded with people, to the places where this thing, asterisk asterisk whatever it was, asterisk asterisk couldn't hide in the dark, I'd be okay. I had to be. Then the truck died. Not a slow sputter, not a warning cough from the engine. Just instant silence. The dashboard went black. The headlights cut out. The entire truck just shut down. My stomach plunged. The Silverado coasted forward, the weight of the trailer pulling at me, the tires grinding against the pavement. I wrenched the wheel, trying to keep control, but I could feel it slipping, feel the pull of something stronger than gravity itself. The radio clicked back on. Not static this time. Not a whisper. Laughter. Low. Slow. Wrong. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the pedals sank to the floor uselessly. No resistance. No grip. The truck was still moving, rolling forward like it was being dragged toward something I couldn't see. Then the mirrors turned black. Not the kind of black you get in the dark, not the normal absence of light. This was deeper. A void, a complete erasure of anything behind me. The Silverado's mirrors weren't reflecting anything anymore. They weren't mirrors anymore. Then, from somewhere inside the cab, a breath. Not mine. Close. Right behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. But I could feel it. The weight of something pressing against the back of my seat, its presence sinking into the truck like oil. I could hear bones shifting, joints clicking into place, skin stretching over something it was never meant to cover. I gritted my teeth, forcing my hands to stay on the wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead, but my vision was going dark at the edges. The truck was slowing, coasting down an incline, but there was nothing ahead, just a road that stretched on forever. Then I heard my own voice. "Stop fighting it, Eric." I flinched. It wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the back seat. My knuckles turned white around the wheel. I clenched my jaw so hard it felt like my teeth would crack. My own voice, saying my name, speaking to me. The cold in my chest tightened. I had to do something. I didn't think. I just acted. I threw the truck into neutral and yanked the emergency brake. The tires screeched, the whole frame jerked sideways, and for a split second, I thought I had just killed myself. But I didn't care. If I let it take me, if I let it pull me down into whatever was waiting on the other side of those mirrors, I wasn't coming back. The truck skidded hard, the trailer jackknifing behind me, metal shrieking as rubber burned against pavement. The cab lurched sideways, momentum slamming me against the driver's side door, but I held on. I held on like my life depended on it. Because it did. And then, impact. The truck slammed into something solid. The world snapped into a blur of motion, glass shattering, the sound of metal twisting in ways it was never meant to. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. When I opened my eyes, I was still in the truck. But everything was wrong. The cab was still. Too still. No sound. No movement. Just an endless, ringing silence. My breath came out in short, painful gasps, my ribs aching from the impact. The windshield was cracked, the driver's side door was dented inward, but I was alive. But I wasn't alone. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head toward the passenger seat. And there it was, sitting in the seat beside me, close enough to touch. The hitchhiker. Or at least, what was left of it. The hoodie was still there, the same dark fabric hanging loose over its frame. But the thing inside it wasn't human. It had never been human. Its skin was too smooth, too pale, stretched tight over bones that jutted at unnatural angles. The mouth still curled into that horrible, endless grin, lips thin and colorless, pulling too far back. The eye sockets were black voids, endless and hungry. And it was watching me. It wasn't moving. It wasn't breathing. But it was watching. I wanted to scream. Wanted to throw myself out of the truck, to run, to do anything but sit there in that silence, trapped with that thing beside me. But I couldn't, because in the cracked side mirror, I saw something worse. I saw my reflection, and I was grinning too. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. The thing beside me, whatever it was, whatever it had been, just sat there, head tilted slightly, that grin stretched across its face, frozen in something that wasn't quite amusement, wasn't quite hunger, but something in between. The air inside the cab was thick, suffocating, pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I wanted to scream, to tear my eyes away, but I couldn't, because my reflection in the mirror was still grinning too. It wasn't just a trick of the glass. It wasn't a distortion from the crack in the passenger side mirror. It was me, but not me. The thing in the reflection had my face, my eyes, my skin, but the mouth, that smile, wasn't mine. It was pulled too wide, too sharp, too knowing, like it had always been there, hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for me to look. The hitchhiker didn't move, didn't react, but I could feel it. The shift, like something was changing, something inside me was unraveling, making room for something else, something that had already started taking my place. I jerked away from the mirror, my body finally responding, every nerve in me firing at once. I shoved at the door, fingers scrabbling against the handle. It wouldn't open. My pulse slammed against my ribs, panic rising like bile in my throat. The windshield was still cracked but intact. The air outside was thick with dust from the crash, but there was no damage bad enough to trap me inside. So why couldn't I get out? The hitchhiker turned its head slightly, like it was watching me figure it out. This wasn't about the truck. This wasn't about metal and glass. I wasn't supposed to leave. The thought settled deep in my gut, cold and final. I turned back toward the mirror, toward the version of me that wasn't me, and I understood. That thing wasn't waiting to take my place. It already had. The whisper came again, curling around the inside of my skull like smoke. You've been here before, Eric. The words weren't coming from the hitchhiker. They weren't coming from outside the truck. They were coming from me. Or rather, from the thing in the mirror. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to think, to push through the terror trying to hollow me out. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't going to just sit here and let this thing erase me, let it wear me like a suit. My breath was ragged, my hands slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel again. I didn't know if I could move, if I could fight whatever this was, but I knew one thing. I wasn't staying in this truck. I slammed my shoulder against the door. Hard. The frame shuddered, but it didn't budge. The thing in the mirror grinned wider. I did it again. Harder. A hairline fracture snapped across the windshield. The thing in the passenger seat finally moved. Slow, deliberate. It turned its whole body toward me, its head tilting as if it were considering something. I knew what it meant. It wasn't going to let me go, not unless I forced it to. I took one more breath, dug my heels against the floorboard, and threw my entire body weight into the door. The lock gave. The metal groaned. And then I was falling. I hit the ground hard, gravel biting into my skin as I rolled away from the truck, pain sparking through my ribs. My head spun, the world tilting sideways, but I forced myself up. I had to move. The truck was still there, still silent, the engine dead. But something was changing. The cab was filling with shadow, something deep and thick, swirling like a living thing. The hitchhiker's shape was dissolving into it, its grin still visible even as the rest of its body faded. And in the driver's seat, the thing wearing my face was still watching me. It didn't try to stop me, because it didn't have to, because I knew, deep down, this wasn't over. The headlights flickered once, dimming as if the truck itself was breathing. Then, slowly, it turned itself back on. The radio crackled, and through the static, my own voice whispered back at me. See you soon. The Silverado's engine roared to life, and then it was gone, peeling off down the highway, taillights glowing like a second set of eyes. watching me as it disappeared into the night. I stood there, gasping, shaking, feeling the cold grip of something still clinging to my skin. My truck, my face, my voice, gone. And in the distant, endless dark, I heard something laugh. The road stretched ahead, a long ribbon of cracked pavement cutting through the desert on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Midnight had come and gone, leaving the world draped in a heavy silence, the kind that presses against your skin and makes you feel like you're not alone. The radio in my truck was off, but I still kept hearing something, a low hum, like a voice just beneath the edge of hearing. Maybe it was the tires. Maybe it wasn't. My name is Travis Holt, middle name Elliot, 34 years old. I was born in San Bernardino, California, but I don't call it home. Nowhere is home anymore. I do contract work, odd jobs, deliveries, whatever keeps gas in the tank and a meal in my stomach. It's not much of a life, but it's mine. I drive a 2012 Chevrolet Silverado 1500, dark red, extended cab. It's got dents in the front bumper from a bar fight that went too far, a cracked windshield that I never got around to fixing, and an engine that still growls like a beast when I push the gas. It's carried me through storms, deserts, and places I probably shouldn't have gone. But tonight, it might not be enough. I had picked up a job, late night hauling for a guy I barely knew, taking a load of scrap metal from some junkyard in Palmdale down toward a warehouse in East LA. It should have been an easy job, just me, the open road, and a paycheck at the end of it. But nothing ever stays easy, does it? It started about an hour ago, when I saw the thing on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a dead animal, just a lump of something sprawled across the shoulder, barely visible in my headlights. But as I got closer, something about it felt off. It was too big, too misshapen, its limbs bending at angles that didn't make sense. My gut clenched, a warning deep in my bones telling me to keep driving. Don't stop. Don't even slow down. But as I passed, it moved. Not a twitch. Not the way roadkill shifts in the wind. It lifted its head, and in the split second before I flew past, I saw its face. Not human, not animal, something in between. My breath locked in my throat. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. But I checked the mirror anyway, some awful instinct forcing me to see if it was still there. It wasn't. The road behind me was empty. Completely empty. Like it had never been there at all. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I forced my foot down harder on the gas, watching the speedometer climb past 80, past 85. My trailer rattled behind me, but I didn't care. I just needed to get the hell out of here. Then my headlights flickered, just for a second, just long enough for something to move in the shadows ahead. I wasn't alone on this road anymore. I kept my foot on the gas, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The Silverado growled against the empty road, the trailer rattling behind me, metal shifting with every bump. I told myself I was imagining things, that I'd been on the road too long, that exhaustion was making my brain play tricks on me. But I knew better. The thing I saw, whatever the hell it was, had been real. It had moved. It had looked at me. And now it was gone. The silence inside the cab felt heavy, unnatural, like the truck had driven into a space where sound wasn't supposed to exist. No wind. No hum from the tires. Just me and my heartbeat, thudding too fast in my chest. I turned the radio on, desperate for something normal, but the second it crackled to life, all I got was static. No stations, no voices, just an endless, droning hiss. I switched it off. The headlights flickered again, a quick pulse of darkness, like something was testing them. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. I checked the fuel gauge, half a tank left. I checked the time, 2:37 a.m. I should have been close to the warehouse by now, but the road ahead looked the same as it had for the past 20 miles. Then, movement. Not up ahead. In the mirror. I saw it for less than a second, but it was there, something low to the ground, crawling on all fours, keeping pace with the truck. Its body was long, too long, its limbs thin and jagged, like it had been stretched out of shape. My breath caught in my throat as I yanked my gaze away, forcing my eyes back to the road. Don't look. Don't acknowledge it. That thought shot through my mind like a warning, but I had already seen it. And worse, it knew I had seen it. The trailer jerked suddenly. I felt the weight of it shift, pulling at the truck, making the tires groan against the asphalt. I checked the side mirrors, my pulse hammering. Nothing. Just empty road. But I knew something was back there. I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I could call the guy at the warehouse, get some kind of human voice on the other end to pull me out of this. No signal. Just a blank screen, like the whole world outside the truck had stopped existing. Then the scratching started. A long, slow drag of claws against metal. Not random. Not wind. Deliberate. The sound crawled up the length of the trailer, moving toward the cab. I gritted my teeth, refusing to look, refusing to acknowledge whatever was out there. If I don't look, it's not real. If I don't look, it can't get inside. Then something hit the roof. Hard. The whole truck shuddered with the force of it, the windshield rattling, dust shaking loose from the dashboard. My hands clenched around the wheel, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Something was on top of the cab. I swallowed bile, my throat dry, my body locked in place. I couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. If I did, I knew whatever was up there wouldn't wait anymore. Then, just above my head, a single knock. A tap, light and almost playful, like it was letting me know it was there. A second knock, then a third, and then, slowly, I heard it breathing. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The only thing I could hear was that breathing. It was slow, deep, like something savoring the moment, drawing in the scent of my fear. It wasn't human. No way in hell. The sound was too low, too guttural, too thick with something wet and unnatural. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep my mind from spiraling, trying to tell myself that the weight pressing down on the cab was just my imagination, that there wasn't something huge and wrong crouched above me. The truck rattled again as the thing shifted. The roof groaned under its weight. Whatever it was big, bigger than a man, and it moved wrong. I could hear the scrape of something long and sharp dragging across the metal, claws, bones, teeth. I didn't know, and I didn't want to. I just needed to get it the hell off my truck. I forced myself to breathe. Think. Move. I was still doing 80 down the highway, the headlights cutting through the endless black ahead, but it felt like I was going nowhere. Like I had been stuck on this road for hours, days, maybe even longer. The air outside was thick, heavy, pressing in like a fog I couldn't see. Then, the sound changed. The breathing stopped, and in its place, a whisper. Right above me, right through the roof. Travis. My stomach plunged. Every muscle in my body went tight. My grip so hard on the wheel, I thought my fingers might snap. It knew my name. The whisper came again, slow and deliberate, dragging my name out like it was tasting it. Troavis. I swallowed, my throat dry, my mind racing. I had two options: keep driving and hope it got bored, or do something really goddamn stupid. I chose stupid. I yanked the wheel hard to the left. The truck veered onto the shoulder, tires screaming against the pavement as the trailer swung out behind me. The whole vehicle lurched sideways, nearly tilting onto two wheels before slamming back down. The weight on the roof shifted violently, and then a thud, then another. It was slipping. I gritted my teeth, bracing as I yanked the wheel the other way, swerving back onto the road in a violent jolt. The thing on the roof slid again, claws screeching as it tried to hold on. Then I saw it. In the mirror. For the first time, I saw what had been riding my truck. It wasn't just big, it was wrong. Too long. Too thin. Its arms bent the wrong way, its fingers ending in curved, bone-white talons that scraped against the cab. Its skin was black and stretched too tight over a body that looked half-rotted, like something dead pretending to be alive. And its face, God, its face. No eyes, just a mouth. A wide, grinning maw that split its head nearly in half, filled with teeth too large to fit inside. And it was laughing. Silent, shaking laughter, like it found the whole thing amusing. The moment my eyes locked onto it in the mirror, the laughter stopped. And then it moved. Too fast. 1 second it was still clinging to the truck. The next, it wasn't. The weight vanished. The cab rocked as if something massive had just pushed off. I held my breath, eyes darting between the road and the mirror, waiting for it to come back down. But it didn't. It was gone. Just like that. Like it had never been there. The road ahead was empty again. The silence inside the truck was almost worse than the noise had been. My chest heaved, my lungs burning, my hands trembling against the wheel. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. Because I knew. It wasn't gone. It was somewhere else now. and it was still watching me. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, but I didn't trust it anymore. It felt like I'd been driving for hours, but the numbers on the dashboard clock barely moved. The city lights that should have been visible in the distance were gone, swallowed by the night. The only thing left was the highway, empty and silent, winding through a darkness that felt heavier than before. My breath came in slow, deliberate pulls, my heartbeat rattling against my ribs like a trapped animal. I hadn't seen the thing since it disappeared, but that didn't mean it was gone. I could feel it, somewhere out there, waiting, moving in a way I couldn't understand. I didn't dare check the mirrors again, didn't dare let my eyes linger too long on anything except the broken yellow lines flicking past under my headlights. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, forcing myself to focus on the pavement ahead, but something was wrong. The road had changed. I should have passed the off-ramp toward the city by now, should have seen the glow of streetlights, gas stations, something that told me I was back in the world I knew. But the highway just kept going, stretching out longer than it should, like it had unraveled itself from reality. The asphalt was cracked in places, like it hadn't been maintained in years, and the further I went, the more I realized this wasn't the same road I had started on. A tight, cold grip settled in my gut, my fingers twitching against the wheel. My GPS had stopped working an hour ago, the screen frozen on a part of the map I had already passed, but I checked my phone anyway. No signal, no time displayed on the lock screen. It was like the moment that thing had climbed onto my truck, I had been dragged somewhere else, someplace where the normal rules of time and distance didn't apply. I exhaled, forcing the panic back down, trying to think through the knot tightening in my chest. If this road wasn't real, then where the hell was it taking me? The answer came too quickly. Up ahead, something blocked the road. At first, I thought it was another car. A dark, hulking mass sprawled across both lanes. But as my headlights cut through the gloom, I realized it wasn't metal. It was flesh. A body. No, several. Twisted, stretched forms lying motionless, their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their faces turned away. Their skin was pale, too smooth, like it had been stripped of imperfections, scrubbed clean of anything human. My stomach churned, but I didn't slow down. I wasn't stopping. Not here. Not for them. My instincts screamed that this was a trap, that if I let my foot ease off the gas, if I hesitated for even a second, something would move. I clenched my jaw, forced my grip on the wheel to stay firm. The bodies weren't normal, weren't even real, not in any way that mattered. They were placed here, arranged like bait, something designed to make me stop. But I wasn't playing along. The Silverado was a heavy truck, built to take a hit, and I had no problem plowing through whatever this was. My foot pressed harder on the gas, the engine growling as the speedometer climbed. The bodies didn't move, didn't flinch as the truck closed in on them. My breath caught as I braced for impact, and then they disappeared. Not scattered, not run over, just gone. The second my headlights passed over them, they dissolved into the pavement, leaving nothing behind. My stomach twisted, my hands clenching the wheel so tight I thought I might crack the leather. It was messing with me, making me doubt what I was seeing, making me second-guess what was real. I kept my eyes on the road, refused to let my gaze linger on the edges of my vision, but I could feel it, something shifting, something watching, something pulling the road apart piece by piece. Then the truck stuttered. The engine coughed, the lights flickered, and for one horrifying second, the Silverado went silent. My heart slammed against my ribs as I threw my foot against the gas pedal, but the truck didn't respond. The engine wouldn't catch, wouldn't turn over, like something had reached inside and torn the life out of it. The speedometer dropped, the tires grinding against the pavement as the truck rolled to a slow, painful stop. The silence that followed was unbearable. No wind, no engine, nothing. And then, just behind me, a soft, wet exhale. My fingers twitched, my breath locking in my throat. The truck was dead, but I wasn't alone. Something was in the back seat. I could feel it. A weight, a shift in the air, something leaning forward, watching me, close enough that if I moved, if I even breathed too loudly, I might feel it against my skin. I stared straight ahead, hands frozen on the wheel, every inch of my body screaming not to look. Then, in the mirror, a shape, too tall, too thin, bent wrong. It grinned, and then it spoke. "You're almost there, Travis." My body reacted before my mind did. I didn't think, didn't process, just moved. My fingers slammed into the ignition, twisting the key over and over, my foot kicking against the gas pedal. The Silverado jerked violently, the engine roaring back to life as the headlights flared against the empty road. And in that split second, the thing in the mirror moved. It lunged forward. I hit the gas. The truck screamed down the road, tires burning against the pavement, the engine howling as I pushed it past its limit. I wasn't thinking about where I was going, wasn't thinking about the city lights in the distance that never seemed to get closer. I was thinking about what had almost touched me, what had spoken in my ear, what had been in my back seat, and was now nowhere. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't look back, because I knew if I did, it would be there, smiling, waiting. The Silverado hurtled down the highway, its tires skimming over the asphalt like I had broken free from gravity itself. My knuckles were locked around the wheel, stiff and bloodless, my foot crushed against the gas pedal like I could outrun whatever the hell was with me. The engine screamed, gears grinding, but I didn't care. The road was a blur of black and gray, the lines on the pavement stretching and warping like they weren't really there at all. Maybe they weren't. Maybe I had left the real road miles ago and was just barreling through somewhere else. The headlights flickered again, their glow pulsing like something breathing or laughing. The mirrors were black, completely empty, like they had stopped reflecting the world at all. I knew without looking that if I glanced into them, it would be there, sitting in the back seat, grinning, watching. But I didn't look. I couldn't. Not after what I had seen. Not after it had spoken to me in my own name, in a voice that didn't belong in this world. The city should have been closer by now. But no matter how far I drove, the lights in the distance never changed, never grew. It was like the road was keeping me trapped, stretching itself longer, bending time, turning my escape into something impossible. And worst of all, I felt it. The presence, the weight of something unseen pressing down, inside the truck, inside my head. Then, the static came back. The radio turned itself on again, filling the cab with a deep, broken sound, like a voice trying to form words through layers of distortion. I reached for the dial, but my fingers froze. Because under the static, I heard myself. My own voice, garbled and distant, repeating something I didn't remember saying. "You're almost there, Travis." The exact words the thing in the mirror had whispered. A shudder ripped through me. My skin crawled, my stomach twisted, every part of me screaming that something was very, very wrong. The truck suddenly felt smaller, the cab closing in, the air turning thick and humid, smelling like metal and rot. Then the laughter started. Soft at first, just a chuckle from somewhere behind me. But then it grew, stretching, deepening, turning into something wet and guttural, something not human. I clenched my jaw, fingers digging into the wheel, refusing to acknowledge it, refusing to let it pull me into whatever this was. The laughter stopped. Then came the whisper. "Look at me." A simple command. Gentle, patient. I wouldn't. I knew what would happen if I did. But then, the truck stalled. The engine cut out completely, the headlights flaring once before plunging me into absolute darkness. The tires skidded, the wheel locked up, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt behind the wheel of my own truck. I had lost control. The Silverado spun. I had no time to react, no time to brace. The world twisted around me, the road vanishing in a blur of shadow and motion. Then, impact. The truck slammed into something. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. My body jerked violently, the seatbelt digging into my ribs as the force of the crash knocked the breath from my lungs. Then, everything stopped. Silence. Darkness. And then, slowly, the lights came back on. Not the headlights. The city lights. They were close now. I gasped, my body aching, every muscle stiff and screaming in protest. I was still alive. I blinked, trying to clear the ringing in my ears, the fog in my head. The truck was still in one piece, the windshield cracked but intact, the frame dented but not destroyed. I had hit something, but when I looked up, the road was empty. No debris, no trees, no sign that I had collided with anything at all. I took a shaking breath, forcing my hands to stop trembling as I reached for the keys. The truck hesitated, then roared back to life like nothing had happened. My pulse hammered, my thoughts spiraling. What the hell just happened? Had I imagined all of it? Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw myself. And I was grinning. Not a normal smile. Not the kind I had ever worn before. The same grin the thing had worn. Wide. Too wide. My breath caught. My chest tightened. And then, without moving, without shifting an inch, the reflection spoke. See you soon. The world went black. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe hours. When my eyes finally opened, the truck was parked. Not on the highway. Not near the warehouse. I was in the middle of a dead-end road I didn't recognize. The city was gone. The highway was gone. And the mirrors were empty. I wasn't in them anymore. But something else was. And it was still grinning. Los Angeles isn't the city people think it is. Not at night. When the traffic thins out and the streets go quiet, when the neon signs flicker and the air feels too still, you start to notice the things that don't belong. The things that move through the empty roads like they're waiting for you to be alone. Like they know you have nowhere else to go. My name is Mason Beckett, middle name Dean, 37 years old. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, but that place feels like a lifetime ago. I've been living out of my truck for the past 3 months, picking up delivery jobs, sleeping in parking lots, trying to figure out what comes next. Spoiler, nothing ever comes next. You just keep moving. I drive a 2011 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD, jet black, crew cab. It's got a few dents, a busted tail light, and a lingering smell of gasoline no matter how many air fresheners I use. I picked it up secondhand from a guy in Barstow who didn't ask too many questions. It gets me where I need to go. I had just finished a job delivering some equipment to a warehouse outside San Diego. The kind of place that looks abandoned but isn't. The kind of place where people don't ask questions about what's in the boxes. I didn't care what was in them. I just cared about getting paid. With cash in my pocket and nothing but time ahead of me, I figured I'd head back to Los Angeles, maybe find a cheap motel for the night. The drive should have been easy, straight shot up the freeway. But somehow, I ended up on the wrong road. I wasn't tired. I wasn't lost. But when I glanced down at the GPS, the map wasn't loading. Just a blank screen, like I had driven somewhere that didn't exist. The road signs weren't helping either. No mile markers, no exits, just a stretch of highway that didn't have an end. Then I saw the first sign. Literally, a single green freeway sign, riddled with bullet holes, standing crooked at the side of the road. But the name on it, I didn't recognize it. Route 93, Black Canyon Highway. I frowned. There's no Black Canyon Highway in California. I would have remembered. I've been driving these roads long enough to know every exit, every detour. But this wasn't one of them. My grip on the wheel tightened. Something about the road felt off. It was too smooth, too new, like it had been paved yesterday. But the world around it? It was old. The trees lining the highway were dead, their branches twisted and leafless like they had been scorched by something long ago. The air felt thick, heavy, like the pressure before a storm that never comes. Then the radio turned on. I hadn't touched it, and it wasn't playing music, just a low, humming static. And underneath it, a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, distant. You should turn around. I slammed the radio off. I was alone in the truck, but I wasn't alone on the road. Because in the rearview mirror, something was following me. I kept my eyes on the road, forcing myself to ignore the creeping unease in my gut, the way my hands had started gripping the wheel too tight, my knuckles aching from the pressure. The rearview mirror showed only darkness, but I knew something was there. I hadn't seen headlights, hadn't heard the low rumble of another engine, yet I could feel the presence of something just beyond the glow of my taillights. It wasn't a car. It wasn't even a shape. It was the kind of presence you sense before you see, before you can put words to it, before your brain can convince you it's not real. But it was real. I knew that much. The road stretched ahead, impossibly long, impossibly empty. I should have hit an exit by now, should have at least passed another car, a gas station, something. But there was nothing. Just the smooth, endless pavement and the dead trees clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. My GPS was still frozen, the screen flickering between static and an error message, and my phone? No service. No time displayed. Just a black void where the connection should have been. It was as if I had driven straight out of reality, straight into a place that wasn't supposed to exist. Then the first sign of movement. A flicker of something in the distance, too quick to make sense of, just a shadow slipping across the road. I tensed, my foot hovering over the brake, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Stopping felt wrong, felt like an invitation to whatever was out here with me. My headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the road ahead, but I knew I had seen something. I wasn't imagining it. And then I heard the knocking. Soft at first, a gentle tapping against the rear window, like fingers rapping against the glass. My entire body went cold. The truck was moving at 60, maybe 65 miles per hour, and there was no way in hell someone was tapping on my back window. No way. But it was there. A slow, deliberate pattern, like someone trying to get my attention. I didn't look. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body told me that if I turned my head, if I acknowledged it, something terrible would happen. Instead, I pressed harder on the gas, feeling the Silverado lurch forward, the engine growling as I pushed it faster, hoping, praying that speed would break whatever spell I had fallen into. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. And then, the voice. You should turn around. I almost lost control. My hands jerked the wheel just slightly, the truck swaying before I forced myself back into control, breathing hard, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice hadn't come from the radio this time. It had come from inside the truck. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the mirror, refusing to acknowledge who or what was sitting in my back seat. My throat was dry, my breath coming in shallow bursts, my pulse hammering so hard I thought it might shake the truck apart. I wanted to scream, wanted to pull over and throw myself out onto the road, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't. Then the headlights flickered. The world ahead of me shifted. For a split second, I wasn't on the road anymore. I was somewhere else. The pavement turned to dirt, the sky above shifting from an empty void to something worse, something swirling, something alive, something that had no stars, no moon, only an endless churning blackness. I saw shapes moving in the sky, too big, too slow, twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The trees on either side of me weren't trees anymore. They were figures, tall, unmoving, watching. Then the world snapped back. I was on the highway again, the truck still speeding forward, my breath ragged, my body drenched in sweat. I gritted my teeth, willing my hands to stop shaking, my mind to stop unraveling. That wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. But I knew. I had gone somewhere else. And whatever was waiting for me there, whatever had been watching from that endless void, it had noticed me. The knocking on the window stopped. And for a moment, everything was quiet. Then, in the rearview mirror, a grin, a mouth stretched too wide, teeth too sharp, curling up from the darkness of my back seat, smiling at me, waiting. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look into the mirror again, refusing to acknowledge the thing sitting behind me. My grip on the wheel was so tight my fingers ached, my breath coming in slow, measured gasps as I tried to keep my heart from slamming its way out of my chest. The road was still stretching endlessly ahead, the dead trees lining either side of the highway bending in strange ways, as if they were leaning closer, watching. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had never been supposed to be here. The presence in the back seat didn't move, but I could feel it grinning. The weight of its gaze pressed against the back of my skull, something thick and oppressive, like hot breath against my skin. The silence was unbearable, the air inside the cab too heavy, too thick, as if the truck itself had been sealed off from the world outside. My brain was screaming at me to react, to do anything, slam on the brakes, swerve, throw myself from the moving vehicle, but something deeper, something primal, told me not to. Then the voice came again. You should turn around. I didn't. I kept driving, jaw clenched, knuckles white. But the thing behind me laughed. Not a loud, human sound. Something wet. Something wrong. Like something trying to remember what laughter was supposed to sound like, but getting it all wrong. The sound slithered down my spine, making my skin crawl, my breath shudder. I could feel the truck shuddering beneath me, like it was reacting to the thing inside it, like it knew something was here that shouldn't be. Then the lights flickered again, and this time, the world didn't come back the same. The road ahead of me was gone, or at least, it wasn't a road anymore. The pavement had cracked, split wide open like a wound, and through it, I could see something shifting. A darkness deeper than the night sky, something liquid, something alive. The lines on the highway were fractured, jagged, leading into nothingness. And above me, the sky wasn't black anymore, it was red. a deep, rotting red, pulsing like it was breathing. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screeching against the broken pavement, the weight of the trailer dragging me forward. My stomach lurched as the cab pitched sideways, and for one awful second, I thought I was going to slide straight into the chasm ahead. But then, silence. The truck came to a violent halt just inches from the edge. I gasped, my whole body trembling, the smell of burning rubber thick in my nose. My head slammed against the seat, my hands still clutching the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The world outside was wrong, broken, unraveling at the edges like an old film reel burning up in the projector. And then I heard it move. The thing in the back seat. The leather creaked, a slow, deliberate sound. A shift of weight. I didn't want to turn. I couldn't turn. But I had to. Slowly, stiffly, I turned my head just enough to see the mirror. And it was right there, leaning forward, close enough that if it had breath, I would have felt it against my neck. It wasn't human. It had never been human. Its skin was stretched too tight, too smooth, like something wearing a mask made of wet, pulsing flesh. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that sucked in the light, and its mouth, God, its mouth. It was still grinning, but now I could see the way its lips peeled back, too wide, splitting all the way to the edges of its jaw, revealing teeth that weren't uniform, weren't meant to fit together. Some were too long, others jagged, as if they had been shoved into its gums by force. And when it spoke again, its lips didn't move. "You're already here." My body locked up. A cold, paralyzing horror sank into my bones. I hadn't driven onto this road. I hadn't taken a wrong turn. It had brought me here. The thing leaned closer, its grin widening, those impossible teeth stretching too far. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its black eyes boring into me, and for the first time, I saw what was behind them. Not hunger, not malice, just patience, like it had been waiting for me to figure it out. Then, a sound from outside. A low, distant rumbling. I turned my gaze back to the road, my chest tightening at what I saw. The cracked pavement ahead wasn't solid anymore. It was opening, shifting, something pulling it apart from beneath. The darkness below stirred, and I could see things moving inside it. Shapes, limbs, eyes, all writhing and twisting in slow, unnatural patterns. I had never been meant to leave this road. And now, I wasn't going to. The air inside the truck was suffocating. The thing in the back seat hadn't moved. Not really, but I could feel it pressing closer, its presence crawling over my skin like an unseen weight. My pulse throbbed in my ears, my breathing shallow, like I was forcing air through lungs that didn't belong to me anymore. My hands trembled against the wheel, the truck idling at the edge of a road that wasn't a road anymore. The pavement stretched and cracked, the jagged lines spreading like veins, splitting wide enough for me to see the shifting blackness underneath. It wasn't empty. Something was down there, something moving, slow and deliberate, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. The rumbling grew louder. Not mechanical, not thunder. It was alive. A deep, resonant sound that I didn't hear with my ears, but felt inside my bones. The sky above me pulsed, that rotten, unnatural red throbbing in slow waves. And for the first time, I realized the light wasn't coming from above. It was coming from below, from the cracks in the earth, from whatever was underneath me. My stomach lurched, and for the first time since this started, I considered that I might actually die here. Not in an explosion, not in a crash, but in something much worse. The thing in the backseat sighed. A slow, deliberate exhale. It wasn't speaking anymore. It didn't have to. It had already told me everything I needed to know. I had been on this road for hours, maybe days, maybe longer. I had felt the way it stretched, the way it bent reality around me, the way no matter how fast I drove, I never reached anything familiar. But I had convinced myself that if I just kept going, if I just outran whatever was chasing me, I'd find my way back. I had been wrong. I wasn't going back. I was never going back. The truck lurched forward, not because I moved it, because something was pulling it. I slammed my foot on the brake, my body tensing against the force dragging me toward the widening gap in the road. The tires skidded, the trailer rattled, metal groaning under the strain. But the truck didn't stop. It was being drawn forward, pulled by something unseen, something beneath the surface. The engine roared uselessly, the gas pedal dead beneath my foot. Panic clawed up my throat. My hands moved on instinct, twisting the key in the ignition, yanking at the gear shift. Nothing. The truck was locked in place, its massive weight no longer my own. The cracks in the pavement spread wider, the dark tendrils of whatever was beneath me reaching up, stretching toward the tires, toward the metal, toward me. Then, for the first time since it had arrived, the thing in the back seat moved. Slowly, smoothly, it leaned forward. Its mouth was still too wide, too full of jagged teeth, but its expression had changed. It wasn't grinning anymore. It looked almost expectant, like it was watching me figure out the last piece of the puzzle. I turned, eyes locked on the road, on the abyss opening before me, on the shapes moving inside it. And I understood. This wasn't a road. It had never been a road. It was a mouth, and I was being swallowed. A choked breath left my throat, my fingers going cold against the wheel. The thing beside me let out a soft, pleased hum, as if it had been waiting for me to finally get it, to finally see what had been so obvious all along. The highway hadn't been stretching out endlessly because I was lost. It was because it was alive, and it had been letting me drive deeper into it, further down, closer and closer to the thing waiting at the bottom. I didn't think. I acted. My hand shot to the door handle, yanking it so hard I thought it might snap off. The door didn't budge. Locked. I scrambled for the passenger side, but before I could reach it, the thing in the back seat moved again. A single, skeletal hand shot forward and pressed gently against my shoulder. Not holding me down, not restraining me, just stopping me, like it was telling me, "This is the part where you sit still." I screamed. A raw, guttural sound tore from my throat as I twisted against its grip, my entire body locking up in pure, overwhelming terror. The road tilted, the truck sliding forward, pulled toward the waiting chasm, and I knew, if I didn't get out now, I never would. I threw everything I had into movement, into breaking free, into one last desperate chance at survival. My elbow snapped back, connecting hard with whatever the hell was behind me, the impact sending shockwaves of pain up my arm. But it worked. The thing let go. I moved fast, yanking the emergency brake, gripping the gear shift, my other hand flying to the window controls. Something gave. The truck shuddered, the tires skidding against the pavement, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt control return to me. The abyss below was only feet away now. I had seconds. I did the only thing I could. I threw the truck into reverse. The engine screamed as the Silverado jerked backward, the trailer groaning, tires skidding wildly against the road. The force slammed me into the seat, my chest tightening as I fought to keep the wheel steady. The thing behind me let out a sharp, inhuman noise, not pain, not anger. Surprise. It hadn't expected me to fight back. The truck lurched violently, the back end fishtailing as I wrestled it away from the growing chasm. The road was disappearing. The cracks in the pavement stretched further, the red glow pulsing from below, something massive shifting in the depths. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just kept going. And then, the world snapped back into place. The sky flickered. The pavement was solid again. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet. No signs of the chasm, no red light, no twisted figures watching from the trees. I gasped, my whole body shaking. The Silverado rumbled underneath me, the speedometer holding steady at 60. The mirrors were normal. The GPS had returned, and the back seat was empty. But I knew. It wasn't gone. Nothing like that ever really leaves. It just waits. The Silverado roared down the highway, the tires gripping pavement that now felt solid, real. But I didn't trust it. My knuckles were bone white against the wheel, my breath shallow, my body refusing to accept that the nightmare was over. The road ahead looked normal, exactly like it should have been. The trees were just trees again. The sky had lost its sickly red hue, and the feeling of being watched had faded. But it wasn't gone. I could still feel it. That thing in the back seat, or whatever had taken its place inside me. I swallowed hard, flexing my fingers against the leather of the steering wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road instead of the thick silence pressing in around me. My mirrors were back to normal, reflecting only what they should, but I knew better than to trust them. I had seen my own reflection change once before. I had seen something grin at me from my own face, twisting my features into something wrong. I kept my foot pressed firm against the gas pedal, watching the mile markers roll past, relief creeping up my spine with every familiar sign. Los Angeles was close now. I was almost back, but the closer I got, the more something inside me told me I wasn't really escaping. I had left that place behind, but it hadn't let me go. The thought tightened around my ribs like a vice. What if I had made a mistake? What if this wasn't my truck anymore? What if this wasn't my body? My own mind turned against me, whispering thoughts I didn't want to entertain. You weren't supposed to get away. That thing had been waiting for me to understand something before it had let me go. But what? What had I missed? Then I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Not behind me. Inside me. I gritted my teeth, forcing my eyes forward, refusing to look again, refusing to see what was shifting just beneath my skin. But it was too late. I had seen it. The briefest flicker of something in the reflection. A face that wasn't quite mine. The edges were wrong. The shape slightly off, like something had worn my skin long enough to mimic it, but not long enough to perfect it. A chill curled through my spine. I kept driving. I kept my hand steady. But I knew. I wasn't alone. The city lights broke through the horizon, warm and familiar, stretching out like a promise of safety. Buildings rose up in the distance. Cars flickered along side streets. And for the first time in what felt like hours, I wasn't the only thing on the road. A white sedan passed in the opposite lane, its headlights flashing across my windshield, and the moment it was gone, a weight settled inside my chest. It wasn't relief. It was something darker, something final, because as I looked at the cars ahead, the city growing closer, the lights spilling into my vision, I realized I didn't belong here anymore. The thought hit me so hard I nearly slammed the brakes. It didn't make sense, but I felt it. This place, this world, it had already let me go. Something else had taken my place. The Silverado hummed beneath me, steady, like it was still mine. But it wasn't, was it? The truck had driven itself forward when I lost control. The mirrors had reflected something that wasn't me. The road had opened itself up, swallowed me whole, and then spit me back out. But I wasn't the same. I let out a slow, shaking breath, flexing my fingers again. The city was right there. I could keep driving. I could pretend nothing had happened. I could park in some motel, step out onto pavement that belonged to a world I had known my whole life. Or I could look in the mirror. Really look. My stomach clenched. My fingers twitched. My breath caught. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head toward the mirror. And there it was. My reflection. Not grinning. Not shifting. Just watching. It wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was waiting for me to understand. And finally, I did. I wasn't supposed to leave that road. I wasn't supposed to escape. Because I hadn't. The second I understood, the mirror rippled, and my reflection smiled. Los Angeles looks different at night. The neon glow hides the cracks. The empty streets feel like they stretch on forever, and the highways? They become something else entirely. There are places on the road that don't belong, places that weren't built for people. And sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you see things you weren't supposed to see. My name is Jonah Grayson, middle name Lee, 35 years old. Born in Fresno, California, but I've spent the last decade bouncing between cities, picking up jobs where I can, staying just long enough to scrape by before moving on. I tell myself I like the freedom, but the truth is, I don't know how to stop moving. I drive a 2010 Chevrolet Silverado 1500 deep blue single cab. It's been with me longer than most people I've known. The only thing in my life that doesn't leave. The bed is littered with tools and scraps from my last construction job, a job I should have been heading back from hours ago. But somewhere along the way, I made a wrong turn. I should have been on the freeway. I should have been surrounded by headlights, bumper-to-bumper traffic crawling toward the city. Instead, I found myself on a road I didn't recognize. A lonely stretch of cracked pavement winding through the hills, the city lights nowhere in sight. No signs, no exits, just the faint glow of my dashboard and the Silverado's headlights cutting through the dark. I checked my GPS, but the screen froze. The map was stuck on an old location, some spot I'd passed an hour ago. The time on my phone wasn't changing either. 2:47 a.m., locked in place. The highway stretched ahead, but it didn't feel right. Too quiet. Too empty. Then I saw the first sign that something was wrong. A dead deer in the middle of the road. I eased off the gas, squinting as the headlights illuminated its body. But the closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't a deer. The shape was wrong. The limbs were too long, bent in places they shouldn't be. The fur was dark, matted with something thick and wet. The smell hit me next, rotting, raw, unnatural. My stomach twisted, and then it moved. Not like an animal, not like anything I had ever seen before. It twisted, limbs cracking as it pulled itself toward the tree line, dragging its body like something wearing a skin that didn't fit. And in the glow of my headlights, I saw them. Horns, curved, jagged, too large for its body, stretching up from its skull like a crown made of bone. I gripped the wheel tighter, a sick sense of wrongness curling around my ribs. I should have turned around. I should have floored it, gotten out of there. But I didn't, because for a split second, it stopped moving, and it turned its head toward me. And I swear to God, it smiled. I kept my foot hovering over the brake, heart slamming against my ribs, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move. But I didn't. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the thing crouched at the edge of the road, its massive horns silhouetted in the Silverado's headlights. It had the rough shape of a deer, but the longer I looked, the less sense it made. Its body was too gaunt, too stretched, like something had pulled its skin tight over an unfamiliar frame. Its legs were crooked at the joints, unnaturally thin, and its face, Jesus, its face. There was something almost human in the way its mouth curled at the edges, the hint of amusement behind its glassy, too wide eyes. For a long, unbearable moment, it just stared at me. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and uneven, the hum of the truck's engine the only sound in the still night. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name, something that settled into my chest like a weight pressing me down. I knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't an animal. This wasn't something that had ever belonged to this world. Then, in one jerking, unnatural motion, it snapped its head to the side. Not like a deer twitching in response to a sound. This was deliberate, like it was looking at something just beyond the glow of my headlights. My stomach clenched, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought the leather might tear. I forced myself to follow its gaze, slowly turning my head toward the tree line. And that's when I saw the other one. It was standing just inside the darkness, barely visible between the dead trees. Not crouching, not crawling, standing, tall, motionless, watching. Its body was the same, thin, stretched too long, its skin a pale, sickly gray. But its horns were even bigger, twisting back over its head in jagged spirals, like something carved from bone. And it was looking directly at me. A sharp chill shot through me, my breath catching in my throat. There were two. Or worse, there were more. I didn't think. I slammed my foot onto the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the Silverado lurched forward, the trailer rattling violently behind me. I didn't care if I hit the thing in the road. I just needed to go. But the second I moved, it did too. Not away, not into the trees. Toward me. Its body twisted unnaturally, a jerking, snapping motion that sent its limbs bending at impossible angles as it launched forward. The thing wasn't running. It was crawling, its two long arms dragging it forward at a speed no living thing should have been able to manage. My stomach flipped, panic burning through my veins as I gritted my teeth and pushed the truck harder. The front bumper clipped something, a leg, a piece of it, something solid. There was a sickening crack, a flash of movement in the corner of my vision as the thing spun, tumbling across the pavement like a broken marionette. But it didn't stop. I looked in the mirror, and I shouldn't have, because in the red glow of my taillights, I saw it pulling itself back up. Bones snapped back into place, limbs straightened, and then it grinned. It was playing with me. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a predator chasing prey. It wasn't acting on instinct, on hunger. It knew what it was doing. And worse, it enjoyed it. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, my hands locked onto the wheel, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. The truck barreled forward, the road stretching endlessly ahead. No exits, no signs, just mile after mile of cracked asphalt disappearing into the night. I told myself I just needed to keep moving, that I could outrun this, that roads always lead somewhere. But the further I drove, the more I realized. This road wasn't leading me anywhere. I had no service. The GPS screen was black. The city lights should have been visible by now, but they weren't. There was nothing. Just the endless, empty road and the things waiting in the dark. And in the mirror, just at the edge of my taillights, the horned things were following. The Silverado roared down the empty road, the tires eating up the cracked pavement. But no matter how fast I went, I couldn't shake them. I could see them in the mirror, tall, crooked figures with those impossible horns, moving in ways that weren't natural. They didn't run like animals. They didn't run like people. They crawled and twisted, their limbs bending at odd angles, their movements jagged, like something unseen was pulling them forward. The further I drove, the closer they got, their pale, stretched faces flickering in and out of the shadows like they were testing the limits of what I could understand. The air inside the truck felt thick, heavy, pressing against my chest like it was trying to force the breath out of me. My hands were shaking, my fingers locked so tightly around the wheel that I couldn't tell if the pain was from my grip or from something else entirely. I couldn't hear anything anymore. Not the hum of the tires, not the engine, not even my own breath. Just silence, like the world had been stripped away, leaving only me, the truck, and the things following me. I flicked my eyes toward the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough to keep going. But for how long? Where was I even going? This road had stopped feeling real miles ago. It didn't curve, didn't change, didn't lead anywhere. The trees on either side of me were wrong, tall, dead things that seemed to lean closer every time I glanced at them. They weren't moving. Not exactly, but I knew they weren't still. Then the road changed. One moment, it was the same cracked pavement I'd been speeding down for what felt like hours. The next, it wasn't pavement at all. It was dirt. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I slammed my foot on the brake, the truck skidding hard, the tires spitting up dust and gravel as I fought to keep control. The whole vehicle shuddered violently, and for a second, I thought I was going to flip. But then, just as suddenly, everything went still. I was no longer on a highway. I was in the middle of the woods. The trees were closer now, their twisted branches reaching overhead, forming a canopy so thick that my headlights barely penetrated the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to breathe, trying to understand what had just happened. I had been on a straight road. I hadn't turned. I hadn't taken an exit. But somehow I was here. I looked at the mirror, and my stomach dropped. They were closer, no longer crawling. Standing now, dozens of them. Some were taller than the trees, their massive, curling horns scraping against the branches. Others were smaller, hunched, their limbs twitching like insects, their eyes black and bottomless. They stood in absolute silence, surrounding the truck, their faces turned toward me, their mouths stretched in those awful, unnatural grins. Then, the first one stepped forward. It moved slow, deliberate, each step painfully controlled. The others remained still, waiting, watching, letting it come for me first. I jammed the truck into reverse, but before I could slam my foot on the gas, something hit the roof. Hard. The entire vehicle rocked, the metal creaking, the frame groaning under the weight of something massive. My pulse spiked, cold terror lacing through my limbs as I felt the cab of the truck shift beneath me, as if something was testing its strength, testing me. A low, deep breath sounded just above my head. Slow. Wet. Wrong. I didn't look up. I couldn't. Then, the voice. You shouldn't have come here. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was inside my head, inside my bones, curling through me like a sickness I couldn't shake. The figure outside the truck was closer now. I saw it clearly in the glow of the headlights, saw the way its skin bulged and shifted beneath the surface, like something was moving underneath. Its mouth twitched, teeth too sharp, too white, too perfect, and then it spoke again, but its lips didn't move. You can't leave, Jonah. A chill shot through me, my breath locking in my throat. It knew my name. The thing on the roof moved. Its weight shifted, slow and deliberate, the sound of something dragging across the metal, making my stomach turn. Then, just as suddenly, the passenger door handle rattled. Something was trying to get in. My body acted before my mind did. I slammed my hand down on the locks, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to force the fear back down, tried to convince myself that this was something I could still control. But I knew better. The trees had moved. The road was gone. The creatures were closing in, their eyes locked on me like they were waiting for me to understand exactly what was about to happen. And I did. This wasn't just a place. It was a trap. A place that had been waiting for someone like me. and I had driven right into its mouth. The silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating, as if the very air had turned into something dense and impossible to breathe. The thing on the roof shifted again, the creaking metal above my head groaning under its weight. My hands were locked onto the wheel, fingers shaking against the leather, my pulse hammering so loud it felt like it had filled the cab of the truck. The thing standing outside, the one closest to the hood, tilted its head. It was waiting. They were all waiting. I could see it now. This wasn't a hunt. This was patience. They had all the time in the world, and they knew I had nowhere to go. The door handle rattled again, more violently this time, as if whatever was outside had grown tired of waiting for me to make my next move. I tried to think past the fear, past the way my vision was narrowing, past the deep, gnawing instinct in my gut that told me I wasn't supposed to be here. I had made a mistake, not just in coming down this road, not just in stopping. I had let them know I could see them, and now they wanted to see me too. The truck engine was still running, idling low, the headlights stretching out into the unnatural forest ahead. I had no idea if the road was still there, if anything was still there, but I wasn't going to sit here and let them decide what happened next. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires kicking up dirt and gravel as the Silverado jolted toward the figure standing in front of it. For a split second, it didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. Then, at the last possible second, it stepped aside. Not in a panicked movement. Not in a way that made me think it was avoiding being hit. It just let me pass. Like it knew it didn't have to stop me. Like it knew the road would do that for them. The trees blurred past as I tore forward, hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath was ragged, my whole body locked in a state of primal terror. I could hear the wind rushing past, the hum of the tires against the dirt, but behind it all, I could still hear them. The figures, the things that had been waiting for me. They were moving too. I didn't dare look at the mirrors, didn't dare let my eyes flick away from the road ahead, but I could feel them, running alongside the truck, moving through the trees, over them, around them, keeping pace with me like they weren't bound by the same rules as I was, like they weren't bound by rules at all. Then, the road changed again. The dirt beneath my tires wasn't dirt anymore. It was wet, slick. I felt the back end of the truck fishtail violently, the trailer groaning under the shift in momentum. The wheel jerked in my hands, pulling hard to the right as I fought to keep control. The headlights flickered, and for the briefest moment, I saw what I had been driving on. Not pavement, not dirt, flesh. A long, rippling expanse of something pale and alive, stretching out beneath my tires. My stomach turned violently, while rising in my throat. I had to get out of here. I had to get out of here now. The truck shuddered hard, and then suddenly, the roof caved inward. A massive impact from above, like something had dropped onto the cab. The windshield cracked on impact, webbing out from the center as the roof buckled downward. I let out a choked, ragged breath, trying to regain control, but the weight was still there. Something had landed on me, and it was still there. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't look, but some awful, gut-wrenching instinct made my eyes flick upward. And in the shattered reflection of the windshield, I saw it. The thing crouched on my roof, its massive, jagged horns curling around its head like a crown, its elongated limbs sprawled across the cab like a grotesque spider. Its skin was stretched too tight, the texture all wrong, like something that had been pulled from the earth and left to dry in the sun. And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it turned its head. Our eyes met, and it smiled. My chest locked up, my breath caught in my throat. Then, suddenly, it moved. One long, clawed hand slammed down onto the windshield, shattering it inward, glass exploding into the cab as the creature pulled itself lower. I let out a strangled curse, one hand still gripping the wheel as I reached blindly for anything I could use, a weapon, a tool, something. My fingers wrapped around the handle of a rusted wrench lying in the passenger seat, my brain barely processing how it got there. I didn't think. I just swung. The wrench collided with the creature's arm. Not hard enough to hurt it, not nearly hard enough, but enough to make it stop, enough to make it pause. The grin on its face twitched, a flicker of something else passing through its two dark eyes. And then, as if it had just remembered something, it let go. The weight disappeared. The windshield was gone, the glass scattered across my lap, but when I looked up, the creature was no longer there. My pulse was still hammering when I slammed the gas again, tearing down the road, trying to ignore the way the trees seemed to close in around me. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and confusion, trying to process what had just happened. It had let me go. Or maybe, worse, it had never needed to hold on to me at all. Then, the road changed again. The trees vanished. The darkness fell away. And suddenly, I was back. Back on the highway. Back on a real road. The city lights were there. The traffic was there. The GPS flickered back to life. The clock on my dashboard ticking forward as if no time had passed at all. My breath hitched, my hands still trembling on the wheel, my entire body locked in a silent tremor of exhaustion and disbelief. I had made it. But as the Silverado rumbled forward, back into the safety of the city, something deep inside me knew the truth. I hadn't escaped. I had been let go, and I had no idea why. The city lights shimmered ahead, glowing soft and warm, a stark contrast to the impossible darkness I had just escaped. The Silverado rumbled beneath me, steady now, the road stretching ahead like nothing had ever been wrong. Like I had never left the highway at all. But I knew better. My hands were still shaking, my body still drenched in sweat, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I had survived, but I couldn't convince myself I had won. You don't win against things like that. You just keep going and hope you don't see them again. Traffic picked up as I neared the city limits. The glow of brake lights, the dull hum of engines, the distant blare of sirens, it was all normal. People driving home from late shifts, bars letting out, the usual chaos of Los Angeles at night. I should have felt safe. I should have felt relieved. But I didn't, because something was still wrong. The silence in the cab felt too deep, too unnatural. Even with the sounds of the city growing louder outside, inside the truck, it was dead. I could feel it pressing in around me, a weight that had settled over my shoulders like a shadow I couldn't shake. My hands twitched against the wheel. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror before I could stop them. Empty. The back seat was just a back seat. No twisted, grinning figure watching from the darkness. No curling horns or stretched, corpse-like faces. Just the faint reflection of the road behind me. My chest rose and fell in a shaky breath, my mind screaming at me to believe it was over. But I couldn't, because I knew. Whatever had been in the woods, whatever had followed me, hadn't stayed there. I pressed my foot harder against the gas, weaving through traffic, the glare of streetlights flashing across the cracked windshield. I needed to get somewhere crowded, somewhere bright. A gas station, a 24-hour diner, a place with people who wouldn't disappear if I looked away. My body was still locked in survival mode, every instinct screaming at me to not be alone. Then, as I slowed at a red light, the radio turned on. I hadn't touched it. Static hissed through the speakers, a low, humming crackle, barely there beneath the hum of the engine. My pulse spiked, my fingers locking onto the wheel, my breath suddenly too shallow. The radio hadn't worked when I was in that place. It had been dead. And then, through the static, a voice. Low, garbled. A whisper. We let you go, Jonah. The words curled through the cab like smoke, wrapping around my ribs, pressing into my skull. My throat clenched. The light turned green, but I didn't move. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, unable to breathe. The static deepened. The whisper came again. We let you go, but something else came back with you. My stomach dropped. A sharp chill raced up my spine, every hair on my body standing on end. My vision blurred at the edges, my hands clenching so tightly around the wheel that my fingers went numb. And then, a breath. Soft. Close. Right behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because in the reflection of the rearview mirror, I finally saw what I had brought back with me. And it was smiling.